The giant cowboy had rejected Abigail as his bride in front of half the town, so why was he now obeying her every word? Ice cracked beneath Graham's boots as Abigail dropped into the frozen mud beside 12-year-old Owen. Her fingers burned with cold as she checked the boy's breathing. "Your coat. Now." Graham tore it off without arguing. Behind them, the laughter at the stage stop had vanished. But what happened next would follow Abigail all the way to High Timber Ranch. "Stay with us." The stagecoach reached Pine Hollow just before noon, dragging a wake of powdery snow behind its wheels. Abigail Turner had been awake for most of the night. Every rut in the mountain road had worked its way into her back. Her wool skirt was wrinkled from travel. The cuffs of her brown coat carried a rim of road dust, and the toes of her boots had gone numb somewhere after the last relay station. Still, when the driver pulled the brake and shouted, "Pine Hollow!" Abigail straightened before anyone could see how tired she was. She was 33 years old. She had crossed hundreds of miles from Iowa with one trunk, $37 sewn inside the lining of her carpet bag, and a letter folded so many times that the creases had nearly worn through. The letter promised a husband, not love. Abigail had stopped expecting promises that large. It promised a rancher named Graham Foster. A decent man, the letter said, hardworking, unmarried, in need of a capable woman willing to make a home in Colorado. Abigail had read those words until she could recite them without looking. She stepped down from the coach. Cold struck her face at once. Pine Hollow sat between low white hills and dark stands of pine, hardly more than two muddy streets buried beneath packed snow. A blacksmith shop smoked at one end of town. Across from it stood a general store, a small hotel, and a saloon with frost clouding the lower half of its windows. Horses stamped beside hitching rails while chimney smoke hung almost straight in the still air. A few people had gathered to watch the coach arrive. Abigail knew those looks. She had known them since girlhood. Eyes went first to her face, then lower. Her shoulders, her waist, her hips. She was a large woman, and always had been. She had stopped pretending not to notice when strangers measured her. So she lifted her chin and looked for Graham Foster. She found him immediately. There was no possibility of mistaking him. The man standing near the freight platform was enormous, 6'7" if he was an inch, with shoulders that strained the seams of a dark canvas coat, and hands so large they made the leather gloves hanging from his belt look small. His hat sat low over the brown hair. A winter beard shadowed a square jaw. He stood slightly apart from everyone else, as though people had learned without being told to leave him room. A boy near the store whispered something to his friend. The friend glanced at Graham and laughed nervously. Graham ignored them. His eyes were on Abigail. For one strange moment, neither moved. Then Abigail reached into her coat and took out the letter. "Mr. Foster?" His brows tightened. "Yes." His voice was deep but quieter than she expected. Abigail walked toward him and held out the letter. "I believe this belongs partly to you." He removed one glove before taking it. His fingers were rough and scarred. He unfolded the paper once, then again. Abigail watched his face. Nothing happened at first. Then his jaw set. His eyes traveled quickly over the page. He read the signature. Read it again. Around them, the town seemed to grow more interested. A woman carrying a flour sack slowed near the general store. Two men beside the saloon stopped talking. The stage driver began unloading Abigail's trunk, but even he glanced over. Graham lowered the letter. "Where did you get this?" "It was mailed to me in Cedar Falls." "Who wrote it?" Abigail stared at him. "You mean besides the name written at the bottom?" Something flickered across his face. Not amusement. Confusion. He looked at the letter again. Then at Abigail. And she knew. Before he said anything, she knew. Her stomach dropped with a slow, sick certainty. Graham drew one breath through his nose. "I never asked for a bride." The words were not loud. That somehow made them worse. Someone behind Abigail gave a short laugh. Another voice muttered, "Lord above." Abigail felt heat climb from her collar into her cheeks despite the cold. She kept her eyes on Graham. "Then somebody has a peculiar sense of humor. I didn't write this. I can see that. I didn't know anyone was coming. That part is becoming fairly clear." Graham glanced toward the people watching them and seemed to notice them for the first time. His expression hardened. Abigail wanted to disappear. Instead, she walked to her trunk and put one gloved hand around the handle. The trunk was heavy. She had packed nearly everything she owned inside it, because there had been little reason to leave anything behind. The stage driver cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're headed south after this. Won't be another eastbound coach until Thursday." "Thursday? 3 days." Abigail looked toward the hotel, then toward Graham. He had taken one step closer, but stopped before entering her space. "Miss Turner, don't." He stopped. Abigail pressed her lips together. For months, she had told herself she was being practical. That was what made the humiliation sting so badly. She had not dreamed of roses or lace curtains or a handsome stranger waiting with open arms. She had only allowed herself one small hope, that someone had asked for her, someone had looked at the plain facts of her life and said, "Send her." Now even that had been foolish. She lifted the trunk handle. It barely moved. Graham's hand started forward. Abigail gave him such a look that he stopped again. "I can manage. I wasn't going to say you couldn't." "Good." The same man behind her laughed again. Abigail turned just enough to find him. A red-faced fellow in a buffalo coat suddenly became interested in the toe of his boot. Then a scream came from the far end of the street. "Uncle Graham!" Every head turned. A little girl came running through the snow. Her bonnet had fallen back against her shoulders. One braid had come loose, and she was running so hard she nearly slipped as she crossed the wagon tracks. Graham changed before Abigail's eyes. The guarded expression vanished. He moved toward the girl. "Lucy?" She reached him, gasping, both mittened hands grabbing his coat. "Owen!" She couldn't get enough air. Graham crouched, bringing his enormous body down to her height. "What happened?" "The pond." Her face crumpled. "He went out past the mill. The ice broke. Mr. Carter pulled him out. But he won't wake up." Graham went white. He stood so fast, Lucy stumbled backward. "Where?" "Mill Pond." Graham was already running, not toward his horse, straight down the street. Abigail looked at her trunk, then at the letter still clenched in Graham's hand as he disappeared between the buildings. She did not think. She ran after him. Her skirt gathered snow around her boots. Her lungs burned almost immediately from the cold. Graham was far ahead, his long strides swallowing the road, but Abigail kept moving. Behind her, other townspeople followed. The mill pond lay beyond the last buildings, where a narrow creek widened beneath cottonwoods before continuing toward the foothills. A crowd had gathered on the bank. A boy lay on a wool blanket near the water. His clothing was soaked. His face was frighteningly pale. A gray-haired man knelt beside him, rubbing his arms hard. Graham dropped to his knees. "Owen." The boy did not answer. Graham reached for him. Abigail arrived breathless and caught his wrist. "Wait." Graham turned. For 1 second, his eyes flashed with something close to fury. "That is my nephew. I know. He's freezing. And rubbing him like that won't help." The gray-haired man stopped. Graham stared at her. Abigail knelt beside Owen. Her knees fast sank into wet snow. She put 2 fingers against the boy's neck. There. Faint. Too fast. He's breathing. Graham's shoulders moved once. Abigail looked toward the crowd. Who has dry blankets? A woman raised her hand. Bring them. She looked at another man. Get his wet coat off. Carefully. Then at Graham. You. Lift him. Graham blinked. Abigail pointed toward the mill building. Inside. Out of the wind. He did exactly as she said. The same man who had rejected her in front of half the street slid one arm beneath the boy's shoulders and the other beneath his knees, lifting him with astonishing gentleness. Inside the mill, someone lit another lantern. Abigail ordered a bench cleared near, but not directly against, the small iron stove. Not too close. Graham lowered Owen onto the blankets. Abigail removed the boy's wet mittens and boots. His socks were stiff with icy water. Lucy stood in the doorway crying silently. Abigail looked at her. Lucy, sweetheart, I need you to do something. The girl wiped her nose on her sleeve. What? Find me 2 more dry blankets. Can you do that? Lucy nodded. Good girl. Go, she ran. Abigail turned back. Graham was watching her. Not her body. Not the travel-worn coat. Not the woman he had refused. Her. What else? He asked. Abigail folded a dry blanket around Owen's chest and shoulders. Keep him still. Graham knelt and placed one broad hand against the blanket. Owen made a faint sound. Graham's head snapped down, up, down. There you are, he whispered. Abigail looked toward the stove. Warm water, not hot. Someone hurried to obey. No one was laughing anymore. The mill filled with the small sounds of people doing exactly what Abigail told them. Boots moving across boards, a kettle being filled, Lucy returning with blankets held against her chest. Outside, snow began falling again. Abigail kept one hand at Owen's neck and watched his breathing. Graham stayed on his knees beside her. When Owen shivered, Graham looked at Abigail instead of acting. She nodded once. Another blanket. He reached for it immediately. And in that crowded mill beside the frozen pond, the giant cowboy who had told everyone he never asked for a bride obeyed the rejected woman without argument. Around them, Pine Hollow had gone completely silent. Owen opened his eyes sometime after 1. By then, the little iron stove had turned the mill room warm enough to fog the nearest window, and someone had brought hot coffee from the hotel in thick white mugs chipped around the rims. Abigail had not touched hers. She sat beside the bench where Owen lay wrapped in 3 wool blankets, watching his face. The boy stirred. His lashes fluttered. Then his eyes opened. Uncle Graham? Graham had been standing near the window with both hands braced against the sill. At the sound of his name, he crossed the room in 2 strides. I'm here. Owen swallowed. His teeth had finally stopped chattering. What happened? You tried to walk across a pond that had no business holding you. Owen frowned faintly. I thought it was thick. So did every fool who ever fell through ice. The words came rough, but Graham's hand settled carefully on the boy's hair. Owen closed his eyes again. Abigail watched Graham's thumb move once across the boy's temple before he seemed to realize anyone could see it. He pulled his hand back. Lucy had fallen asleep on a flour sack against the wall, her cheek pressed into Abigail's folded shawl. The gray-haired man who had helped pull Owen from the pond was named Mr. Carter. He had already gone home to change his soaked trousers. Most of the crowd had drifted away too. carrying the afternoon's story with them. The woman nobody had ordered had arrived in Pine Hollow. The giant had rejected her. Then she had helped keep his nephew alive. By supper, Abigail suspected every stove in town would have its own version. She was too tired to care. Graham looked toward her. How long before he can travel? If the shaking stays gone and he keeps waking when we speak to him, I'd say we can move him before dark. Slowly. You've done this before. It was not a question. Abigail glanced at Owen. Railroad boarders do foolish things in winter, too. Graham waited. My mother ran a boarding house, she added. Men came in half frozen more than once. He nodded. There were several things he could have asked. He asked none of them. Instead, he finally pushed the untouched coffee mug toward her. You should drink that. Abigail looked at the coffee, then at him. Is that an order? No. His mouth shifted slightly. Observation. She remembered the stage stop, the letter in his hand, the watching faces. She drank the coffee anyway. It had gone lukewarm. By 3, Owen could sit upright without swaying. Graham carried him to a sleigh waiting outside. He could have lifted the boy like a sack of flour. Instead, he moved slowly, one arm behind Owen's shoulders and one beneath his knees, checking Abigail's face before every adjustment. Lucy woke as they stepped outside. She looked first at Owen, then Abigail. You're coming too, aren't you? Abigail hesitated. Graham heard it. His gaze moved toward the stage office at the end of the street. The eastbound coach would not leave for 3 days. Abigail's trunk still sat beside the freight platform. Miss Turner, he said, you can stay at the ranch tonight. She looked at him. Because the hotel is full? No. Because you feel responsible for me? His jaw tightened. No. Then why? He glanced at Owen. Because he's going to need watching. It was practical. Almost painfully practical. Abigail could work with practical. All right. High Timber Ranch lay nearly 6 miles northwest of Pine Hollow. They followed a wagon road that climbed gradually through pine and open meadow, the sleigh runners whispering over hard snow. Abigail rode beside Lucy in the back. Graham sat forward holding the reins, his shoulders blocking much of the wind. Owen lay between 2 quilts on a bed of straw. Every few minutes, Abigail touched the boy's forehead or asked him a simple question. What's your sister's name? Lucy. How many horses does your uncle own? 5. Graham looked back. 4. Owen's mouth twitched. You still got that ugly roan? He belongs to Mr. Webb now. Then 4. Abigail hid a smile. By the time High Timber Ranch appeared through the trees, daylight had begun turning blue. The house surprised her. She had imagined something rough and temporary. Instead, it was a broad 2-story structure built of dark pine logs over a stone foundation, with a deep porch facing south and smoke rising from 2 chimneys. A barn stood downhill behind it. Beyond that were corrals, hay sheds, and pasture fences disappearing beneath snow. It should have looked warm. It didn't. Even from the sleigh, Abigail noticed curtains drawn over several windows despite the fading daylight. No lantern burned on the porch. No dog came barking. Graham stopped beside the steps. The front door opened before he could climb down. A woman stood there. She was perhaps 35, though at first glance she looked older. Her dark dress hung loosely from narrow shoulders, and one hand remained wrapped around the doorframe as though she needed it there. Where have you been? Then she saw Owen. Everything left her face. Owen? He's all right, Graham said quickly. Helen, he's all right. She came down the steps without a coat. Graham lifted Owen from the sleigh. Helen touched her son's cheek with both hands. What happened? The pond. Her eyes closed. Only for a second. Then she looked at Graham. I told him not to go there. I know. You were supposed to be in town meeting. Her gaze reached Abigail. The rest of the sentence died. No one spoke. Abigail climbed down from the sleigh. Helen looked at her coat, her trunk, then her face, and something like recognition appeared. Oh. Graham's expression hardened. Helen. She pressed both hands together. Abigail Turner? Abigail nodded once. Helen closed her eyes again. That told Abigail almost everything. You wrote the letter. Graham's voice was very quiet. Helen opened her eyes. Bring Owen inside first. Helen, inside. There was enough steel in that one word to move even Graham Foster. He carried Owen through the door. Abigail followed because the boy still needed watching, and because leaving at that exact moment would have felt like letting Helen escape the conversation too easily. The front room was clean, almost too clean. A braided rug lay straight before the hearth. 3 wooden chairs stood around a square table. A 4th sat slightly apart near the wall. Abigail noticed dust on that 4th chair. Not much. Enough. A man had once sat there. Nobody had moved it. Helen brought blankets from upstairs. Lucy began talking too fast, explaining the pond, Mr. Carter, Abigail, the mill, the warm water. Helen listened while arranging pillows beneath Owen's head. When Lucy said, Miss Turner told Uncle Graham what to do, and he did everything, Helen stopped. She looked at Abigail. Thank you. Abigail removed her gloves. You can thank me after he's still feeling well tomorrow. Helen's mouth trembled. She nodded. Supper was quiet. Owen drank broth near the stove. Lucy ate quickly and kept looking at Abigail as though afraid she might disappear between bites. Helen barely touched her food. Graham ate standing at the counter until Abigail finally said, There are chairs. He looked toward the table. 3 occupied, 1 dusty. He remained standing. Later, after Owen had been settled upstairs, Lucy sat on the hearthrug brushing the mane of a wooden horse. Graham repaired a broken harness buckle beneath the lamp. Helen folded towels that did not appear to need folding. Abigail sat near the stove with her hands around a coffee mug. It was Lucy who broke the silence. Papa hated that pond. Helen's hands stopped. Graham did not look up. He said there was always water moving underneath, even when the top froze. Yes, Helen said. Lucy kept brushing the wooden horse. Was Papa scared when he died? The buckle slipped from Graham's fingers. It struck the table. Small sound. Hard sound. Nobody moved. Lucy looked up at him. Uncle Graham? He stared into the stove. The firelight caught one side of his face. Abigail watched his throat move. No answer came. Helen folded the same towel twice. Lucy lowered her eyes. Abigail did not try to rescue the silence. Some silences belong to the people inside them. Graham finally stood. Time for bed. Lucy obeyed. That was worse somehow. After the children were upstairs, Graham turned to Helen. What did you do? Helen was standing beside the cold coffee pot. You weren't listening. That doesn't answer me. I asked for help. You advertised for a wife in my name. I wrote that marriage was possible. You signed it Foster Ranch. I didn't say you wrote it. You let a woman cross half the country believing I wanted her here. Abigail stood near the doorway. Helen looked at her. For the first time all evening, the widow's careful composure disappeared. I am sorry. Abigail said nothing. Helen's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. Daniel died in April. Graham looked away. Helen continued. By June, Owen had stopped sleeping. By July, Lucy was climbing into my bed every night. By August, Graham was working from before daylight until after dark because he thought if he kept every fence standing and every calf alive, none of us would notice he had no idea what to do with us. Helen. And I could barely get through breakfast without needing to sit down. Her voice did not rise. That made it land harder. I needed another adult in this house. Abigail stared at her. Helen swallowed. I thought if I wrote honestly, no woman would come. So you wrote dishonestly. Yes. The word dropped between them. Graham turned toward Abigail. Miss Turner. She looked at him. Whatever he had intended to say disappeared, because now Abigail understood. Not only that Graham had never requested her. Something worse, nobody had. Not really. Helen had not looked through names and chosen Abigail Turner because something about Abigail mattered. She had been looking for hands, a cook, a housekeeper, someone to mind children, perhaps a woman desperate enough to stay. Abigail set her coffee mug down carefully. I'd like to know where I'm sleeping. Helen blinked. You're staying tonight? Owen fell through ice this afternoon. I'm not leaving before I know he wakes normally tomorrow. Helen nodded quickly. There's a room beside the kitchen. It's small, but the stovepipe keeps the wall warm. Fine. Graham took one step toward Abigail. She looked at him. He stopped. Again. That was becoming a habit between them. The room beside the kitchen contained a narrow bed, a washstand, a peg for clothes, and a small window facing the barn. Someone had already carried her trunk upstairs. Abigail closed the door. She removed her coat, then her boots, then the pins from her hair. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. A child coughed. Someone added wood to the stove. The house was full of people. Yet Abigail had never heard loneliness make so much noise. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. Hours earlier, she had stepped off a stagecoach expecting to meet a husband. Instead, she had found a man who did not want a bride, a widow who had lied because she was drowning, a boy who nearly died in a frozen pond, and a little girl asking questions nobody in the house could answer. On the other side of the wall, Graham's deep voice said something too low for her to make out. Helen answered. Then silence. Abigail lay down without undressing further. Below her window, the barn lantern burned against the snow, and somewhere inside High Timber Ranch sat 4 people who had lost one man and had never figured out how to move the empty chair away from the table. Abigail closed her eyes. Morning would decide what happened next. Morning came gray and cold. A thin crust of frost had formed along the lower edge of the window, and somewhere beyond the wall, a stove door clanged shut. Abigail lay still for a few seconds, listening. Bootsteps crossed the kitchen. A chair scraped. Then came the low murmur of Graham's voice. She sat up. Her neck ached from travel, her shoulders from the mill, and the borrowed nightdress Helen had left outside her door was too narrow across the sleeves, so Abigail had slept in her chemise instead. She dressed quickly, pinned her hair, and went downstairs before anyone could decide she needed resting. Graham stood at the stove pouring coffee into a tin cup. He looked up. Neither mentioned yesterday. Morning, that was all. Helen was upstairs with Owen. Lucy sat at the table eating oatmeal, swinging one boot beneath her chair. He woke up twice, Lucy announced. Mama made him drink broth. Did he know where he was? Yes. Did he complain? Lucy nodded seriously. He said the broth tasted like dishwater. Abigail reached for the coffee pot. Then he's improving. Lucy smiled into her bowl. Graham watched Abigail pour coffee. He had changed clothes since yesterday. Clean work shirt, dark vest, heavy trousers tucked into boots still marked with dried mud from the pond. He looked even larger inside the kitchen. There was something waiting behind his eyes. Abigail knew it before he spoke. After breakfast, he said, I need to talk to you. I suspected you might. She carried her cup to the table. He did not sit. That irritated her more than it should have. Men often stood when they wanted a conversation to feel like a judgment. Graham seemed to notice where her eyes went. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Lucy looked between them. Abigail pointed toward the stairs. Go check whether your brother wants anything. He probably wants bacon. Then tell him he can have broth. Lucy made a face but obeyed. The moment she disappeared, Graham reached into his vest pocket and placed folded bills on the table. Abigail looked at them. What is that, stage fare? Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. To where? Anywhere east you choose. Denver first. From there you can make connections. He slid the money closer. Abigail did not touch it. You carry that much cash around your ranch? No. Then where did it come from? I keep emergency money locked in the office. And I'm the emergency? His face changed slightly. That isn't what I meant. It's what you did. Graham leaned back. I'm trying to make this right. No. You're trying to make it over. His jaw tightened. Abigail put down her cup. I arrived yesterday because a letter told me a man in Colorado was willing to consider marriage. You weren't. Fine. That is not your fault. Helen had no right. She didn't. And neither of you has the right to decide the next step for me because you feel guilty about it. I don't feel guilty. Abigail raised one eyebrow. Graham looked at the money. Not only guilty, that sounds closer. He let out a slow breath. I'm not trying to insult you. Then stop trying to pay me to disappear. Silence settled between them. The stove ticked. Outside, cattle bawled from the lower corral. Graham folded his hands on the table. What do you want me to do? The question stopped her. Yesterday he had not asked what she wanted. Nobody had. Abigail looked toward the frosted window. I don't know yet. That's fair. I cannot go back to Iowa. His eyes lifted. Cannot. Will not. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. My mother and I ran a boarding house outside Cedar Falls for 11 years. Railroad men, traveling salesmen, farmhands coming through for seasonal work. 12 rooms when they were all fit to rent, 10 when the roof leaked. Graham said nothing. My mother died last March. I'm sorry. Abigail nodded once. The property had belonged to my father. His will left it to my younger brother, Jacob. He had moved east years before. He came back with his wife after Mama died. Her mouth tightened. They decided the house needed changing. Graham's expression remained still. Abigail appreciated that. No soft eyes. No pitying shake of the head. His wife wanted my room for storage. Jacob wanted the account books. They were polite about it for almost 2 weeks. What did you get? $37. 2 dresses. My mother's sewing basket. The trunk upstairs. That's all? That was enough to leave. Graham looked at the table. Abigail knew he was angry before he said anything. His right hand closed slowly. Not around hers, around nothing. She noticed. You could contest that. With what money? He looked at her. Fair point. Abigail took another drink of coffee. So no, I don't want your stage fare. What do you want? The stairs creaked. Helen appeared, moving carefully. She had changed into a dark blue dress, but the color did little for the grayness in her face. Owen's asleep. Abigail turned toward her. Did he finish the broth? Most of it. Good. Helen looked at the money on the table, then at Graham. Understanding passed over her face. Oh. Graham stood. I offered her fare east. Helen's eyes went to Abigail. And? I refused. Helen pressed one hand against the chair back. Abigail looked at her. You said last night you needed help. Helen nodded. Do you still? Graham looked sharply at Abigail. Helen answered first. Yes. I can cook. Keep household accounts. Preserve food. Handle laundry, purchasing, boarders, sick people when they're sensible enough to stay in bed, and children when they aren't. A small sound came from the stairs. Lucy was sitting halfway down, listening. Abigail ignored her. I'm not asking to be anyone's wife. Graham's eyes stayed on her. I'm asking for work until spring. Helen blinked. Work? Honest work. We can't pay much, Graham said. I didn't ask for much. What would you ask? A room, meals, a small wage I can put aside. And if either of you decides you don't want me here, you tell me directly. No letters, no arrangements made behind closed doors. Helen flinched. Abigail did not soften it. Some truths did not improve when wrapped nicely. Graham looked toward Helen, then back at Abigail. This ranch isn't easy in winter. Neither was a boarding house beside a railroad. It can snow 3 feet overnight. I own boots. There are days the road to Pine Hollow closes. I don't intend to walk to town for entertainment. Something almost happened to Graham's mouth. Almost. Then he shook his head. You don't know us, no. You don't know what this house is like. I spent one evening here. That isn't enough. No, Abigail said. But it was enough to know your sister-in-law needs sleep. Your nephew needs someone to stop treating anger like grown man courage. And your niece needs adults who answer questions even when the answers hurt. Graham went very still. Helen lowered herself into the chair. Abigail regretted the sharpness only after it was already in the room. Then Lucy came down the final steps. She walked straight to Abigail. Abigail looked at her. Lucy said nothing. She simply caught 2 fingers around Abigail's sleeve. Small grip, firm. Abigail looked toward Graham. He was staring at Lucy's hand. His shoulders dropped by a fraction. Through winter, he said. Abigail waited. Room and meals, $3 a week, 4. He looked at her. You bargain fast. I managed accounts for 11 years. $3.50. 4. And I handle household purchasing so nobody has to make unnecessary trips to town. Helen spoke quietly. Give her 4. Graham looked at his sister-in-law. Helen lifted one shoulder. She already frightens you. Might as well pay her properly. For the first time, Abigail saw Graham Foster genuinely smile. It changed his whole face. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then it was gone. 4, he said. Abigail held out her hand. He looked at it before taking it. His palm swallowed hers. His grip was careful. Not weak. Careful. Agreed. That afternoon, Abigail moved her belongings into the small room beside the kitchen properly. Helen gave her space in the wardrobe. Lucy brought her a chipped blue pitcher for washing and declared it prettier than the brown one. Owen woke long enough to complain about being confined upstairs. Abigail told him that complaining was encouraging. By evening, the ranch had already begun giving her work. A flour bin needed inventorying. 2 jars of preserved beans had spoiled. The pantry ledger had not been updated since June. Abigail sat at the kitchen table with pencil and paper until the supper dishes were washed. Later, when everyone had gone upstairs, she returned to her room for the marriage letter. She carried it back down. The stove fire had burned low. Graham stood near the back door pulling on his coat for one last barn check. He saw the paper in her hand. Abigail opened the stove. Orange light spilled over her fingers. She looked once at the handwriting that had carried her across half a continent. Then she placed the letter into the fire. The corner curled first. The ink darkened. For one moment, the words were still readable. Then the flame took them. Graham said nothing. Abigail closed the stove door. "You don't have to apologize again. I wasn't going to." She looked at him. He hesitated. "I was going to say I'm glad you stayed." Abigail's hand remained on the iron latch. "Don't say things because you think I need them." "I don't." His voice was quiet. "That's why I said it." Their eyes held. Then Graham put on his hat and went out into the cold. Abigail stood alone beside the stove. Through the window, she watched his tall shape cross the snow toward the barn lantern. She had come to Colorado expecting a husband. Instead, she had negotiated wages. For some reason, that felt more honest. Behind her, the last edge of the marriage letter collapsed into ash. Abigail woke before sunrise the next morning to the sound of someone splitting wood behind the house. One strike. Pause. Another. She dressed by lamplight, braided her hair, and stepped into the kitchen while the room was still blue with early cold. The stove had nearly gone out. She added kindling, opened the draft, and set the coffee pot over the flame. By the time Graham came in carrying an armload of wood, she had biscuits in the oven and a sheet of paper on the table. He stopped when he saw it. "What's that?" "Work." He set the wood beside the stove. "I thought that was breakfast." "That too." Abigail had divided the paper into columns: flour, salt, coffee, beans, dried apples, lamp oil, soap, feed supplements, medicines. Beside each item was an amount. Graham leaned over the table. "You inventoried the pantry?" "Last night. You were supposed to sleep." "I did." "When?" "Enough." He looked at her. Abigail looked back. He seemed to decide that argument would waste time. "What's wrong with the stores?" "Not much yet. But the flour won't last until Christmas if everyone keeps scooping it like grain for horses." A small voice came from the doorway. "I don't." Lucy stood there in her nightdress, hair hanging loose around her shoulders. Abigail pointed at the table. "You used half a cup yesterday trying to make paste." Lucy's mouth opened. Graham looked at her. "Paste?" "For the paper house." "What paper house?" Lucy considered this. "The one I haven't made yet." Graham rubbed a hand over his beard. Abigail turned away before he could see her smile. Within a week, the house had rules. Not many. Abigail did not believe in rules that existed merely because adults enjoyed making them. Breakfast was served at 7. Anyone late ate cold food unless they had already been outside working. Wet boots stayed on the rack beside the back door. Lucy practiced letters after breakfast. Owen, once he was steady on his feet again, was given light chores until Abigail was satisfied he had completely recovered. Helen was required to sit down at noon, whether she claimed to be tired or not. Helen objected to that one. "I have spent 15 years managing a household, and you look like you've spent the last 6 months trying to manage 3 at once. I'm fine." Abigail put a cup of coffee beside her. Then sitting for 20 minutes shouldn't harm you. Helen stared at the cup, then at Abigail. You are bossy, so I've been told. Graham is going to regret hiring you. From the mudroom came Graham's voice. I'm beginning to suspect that. Abigail turned. He was removing his coat. You're late for breakfast. I was moving cattle. Then your eggs are warm. He paused. Helen smiled faintly into her coffee. The house began changing in ways no one announced. Lucy stopped eating alone at the end of the table and started bringing her school slate into the kitchen so Abigail could check her spelling while kneading bread. Helen began sleeping later. Not much. 20 minutes some mornings. An hour once. The first morning, Abigail realized Helen was still upstairs after sunrise. She simply made less noise with the pans. Graham noticed. He said nothing. Owen was harder. He had recovered from the pond quickly enough to become angry about being watched. At 12, he had his father's narrow face and Graham's stubbornness, though Abigail suspected neither uncle nor nephew would appreciate the comparison. He wanted to work. Not boys' work. Men's work. He hauled feed sacks too heavy for him. Tried to repair fence rails alone. Once Abigail found him saddling a bay gelding that had spent the morning favoring its left foreleg. Put the saddle back. Owen ignored her. Owen. He's fine. The horse is tired. He's a horse. Yes. Which means he can't tell you when you're being foolish. The boy jerked the cinch tighter. The gelding pinned its ears. Abigail crossed the barn aisle and took hold of the saddle horn. You're not riding him. Owen's face flushed. You aren't my mother, no. You aren't even family. No. Then stop telling me what to do. Abigail held his gaze. Unsaddle the horse. I said no. Graham appeared at the barn door. Owen saw him. That should have ended it. Instead, the boy's shoulders squared. I'm going. No, Graham said. Owen spun toward him. You always say no. That horse is sore. He's fine. You heard, Abigail. Owen's expression sharpened. Of course. Graham frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Say it. Owen kicked at the straw. Then he looked at Abigail. You come here and everybody starts acting like you own the place. Abigail did not answer. The boy's anger found the silence and pushed harder. You're just some woman nobody wanted. The barn went still. Graham moved. Abigail lifted one hand. He stopped. Owen's face changed almost at once. He had heard himself, but pride had already trapped him inside the sentence. Abigail walked to the wall. She took down a short-handled axe used for kindling. Owen stared at it. She carried it past him. Outside, she set it beside the chopping block. Then she pointed toward the woodpile. If you have enough strength to speak like a grown man, you have enough strength to split wood like one. Owen blinked. What? Kindling. Before supper. You can't make me. No. Abigail looked at Graham. Can I? Graham's mouth twitched. He turned it into a cough. Owen. The boy looked betrayed. Uncle Graham. Kindling. Owen's jaw dropped. Abigail went back inside the barn and loosened the bay's cinch. Behind her came one furious thump as the axe struck wood. Then another. By supper, Owen had split enough kindling for several days. He came into the kitchen red-cheeked and silent. Abigail put a full plate in front of him. No lecture. No demand for an apology. He ate everything. Halfway through the meal, Lucy whispered loudly, Did you call Miss Turner something terrible? Owen glared at her. Lucy leaned toward him. I heard Uncle Graham laughing in the barn. I was not laughing, Graham said. You were. I coughed. You cough funny. Helen covered her mouth. Abigail looked down at her plate. Owen tried not to smile. Failed. Lucy saw it and began laughing. That did it. Helen laughed too. Only once at first, almost as though the sound had surprised her. Then again. Graham leaned back in his chair. The corners of his mouth lifted. Owen finally laughed into his sleeve. For a few seconds, the room sounded like a family eating supper instead of people waiting for someone who would never come through the door. Then Lucy knocked over her milk. Everyone stopped. She looked horrified. Abigail slid a cloth across the table. Clean it. Lucy did. The laughter returned. Late that night, Abigail came downstairs for water. The kitchen was dark except for moonlight and the orange glow beneath the stove door. She heard a faint scraping sound in the front room. Abigail took the lamp from the sideboard and turned the wick low. Graham sat alone near the hearth. Lucy's wooden horse lay across his knees. One of its legs had broken near the body. He was fitting a tiny peg into the wood with a narrow hand drill, his huge fingers working with surprising patience. Abigail leaned against the doorway. You repair toys too? Graham looked up. For a man his size, he had the peculiar ability to look caught. She left it on the stairs, and naturally the horse found its way onto your workbench. He glanced down. Daniel made it. Abigail said nothing. Graham tested the repaired leg. My brother was better at small work. It looks fine. It'll hold. That's what matters. He nodded. Abigail filled her water cup. Before she went upstairs, she looked back. Graham had taken a small scrap of sandpaper and was smoothing the repair so Lucy would not catch her fingers on it. The next afternoon, Graham came inside through the kitchen door and found Abigail beside Helen's chair. Helen had fallen asleep near the window. A half-finished basket of mending rested at her feet. Abigail placed a fresh cup of coffee on the side table. She did not wake her. She did not cover her with a blanket. She simply moved the coffee within easy reach for whenever Helen opened her eyes. Then Abigail returned to the counter and began cutting carrots for stew. Graham stood in the doorway longer than necessary. Abigail glanced over. Something wrong? No. Then shut the door. You're letting the cold in. He obeyed. At supper that night, Owen passed Abigail the bread without being asked. She took a slice. Thank you. He shrugged. After a moment, he muttered, Sorry about what I said. Abigail buttered the bread. I know. He waited. She looked at him. That doesn't mean you won't split wood next time. Lucy burst out laughing. Owen groaned. Even Graham smiled. And slowly, almost too quietly to notice, High Timber Ranch began to sound different. A chair scraping across the kitchen floor. A child reciting spelling words. Helen humming half a tune before catching herself. Graham's boots coming in through the mudroom at dusk. Abigail calling from the pantry that somebody had opened the last jar of peaches without writing it in the ledger. Nothing miraculous happened. The empty chair remained near the wall. Daniel was still dead. Owen still woke angry some mornings. Lucy still cried some nights. Helen still stared too long at the road when wagons passed. But the house was no longer holding its breath every hour of the day. One evening, Graham stood outside after feeding the horses. Snow lay blue across the yard. Through the kitchen window, he could see Abigail moving between stove and table, Lucy beside her with a slate, Owen carrying in wood, Helen sitting near the fire. Abigail looked up. Through the glass, their eyes met. Neither waved. Neither smiled. She simply held his gaze for a second. Then she turned back to the stove. Graham remained in the cold. He had never asked Abigail Turner to come to High Timber Ranch. She had never asked permission to begin putting the pieces back in order. And somehow, without demanding a place inside his family, she had already begun changing the shape of the space around them. By the first week of December, the pantry shelves at High Timber Ranch had begun to look sensible again. Abigail had the flour measured by the week, the coffee counted by the pound, and the lamp oil written into a ledger Helen had abandoned sometime in the summer. She kept receipts folded beneath a leather strap near the back of the book, each one dated in pencil. That Monday morning, she found Graham studying the supply list over breakfast. "We need salt," he said. "We need more than salt." He looked down. Coffee, soap, nails, lamp wicks, horse liniment. Graham lifted his eyes. "You planning to buy Pine Hollow? If Pine Hollow sold decent dried apples, I might consider it." Owen nearly smiled into his oatmeal. Helen said she was too tired for the trip, and Lucy had lessons to finish, so by 8, Graham had hitched the bay team to the ranch wagon. Abigail appeared in her brown wool coat and dark green bonnet carrying the account book. Graham looked at it. "You're bringing the ledger?" "I'm bringing the money." That answer worries me more. She climbed onto the wagon seat without asking for help. Graham walked around the other side. The road into Pine Hollow was hard-packed from several cold days without fresh snow. The wagon wheels rattled over frozen ruts, and frost silvered the sage along the lower slopes. For the first mile, they said very little. Abigail had learned that Graham did not fear silence. Neither did she. It made traveling with him easier than traveling with most people. At the narrow bend above Miller Creek, the wagon tilted sharply. Graham shifted closer without touching her. His arm braced along the back of the seat until the wheels leveled again. Abigail noticed. She said nothing. Pine Hollow was busier than it had been the day she arrived. Freight wagons stood outside the general store. A line of horses crowded the hitching rail near the saloon. Someone was hammering new boards onto the roof of the livery stable. Abigail felt heads turn before the wagon stopped. Some people recognized her. More recognized Graham. He climbed down. When Abigail moved to follow, he offered one hand. She hesitated. Not because she needed it, because she remembered the stage platform and the way half the town had watched him reject her. Graham seemed to understand something of that. He started lowering his hand. Abigail placed hers in it. He steadied her down. Nothing more. Inside Bowen's Mercantile, the air smelled of coffee beans, wool, leather, and kerosene. Abigail handed the clerk her list. The young man behind the counter glanced at Graham, then up, then farther up. "Morning, Mr. Foster." "Morning." The clerk spoke louder. "You need feed?" Graham stared at him. Abigail slowly turned her head. The clerk repeated himself even louder. "Feed?" "I hear fine," Graham said. The clerk flushed. "Oh, course." Graham's face did not change. Abigail's did. The clerk began gathering supplies. A pair of boys near the Cracker Barrel kept looking at Graham's shoulders and whispering. One stretched his arms wide to imitate him. Graham ignored them. Outside the saloon, a drunk man stumbled into the street as Graham carried a 50-pound flour sack toward the wagon. The man whistled. "Look at that." Graham kept walking. "Biggest ox in Colorado." A few men laughed. Graham loaded the flour. He did not turn. Abigail stood beside the wagon holding a paper-wrapped bundle of candles. She waited for Graham to say something. He didn't. His jaw worked once. That was all. They went to Miller's Dry Goods next because Abigail needed needles, thread, and cloth for repairing Owen's shirts. The shop was warmer than the mercantile, with bolts of fabric stacked from floor to ceiling. Two women stood near the counter examining winter wool. Abigail recognized one from church the Sunday before, though they had never spoken. She reached for a bolt of dark blue flannel. One woman glanced at her, then at the cloth. "That won't be enough." The other woman smiled. Abigail kept her back turned. "For curtains?" the first asked sweetly. "No," Abigail said. "Oh." A pause. Then, softly enough to pretend it was private, and loudly enough to make sure it was heard, the second woman said, "I suppose a dress takes rather more material when there's that much woman to cover." A small laugh. Abigail's fingers stopped on the flannel. She had heard worse. That was the trouble. People thought surviving cruelty made a person immune to it. It didn't. It only taught you how to keep your face still. The first woman leaned closer to her friend. "I heard she came here expecting Foster to marry her. Imagine. Maybe he took one look and changed his mind." Graham was near the door. Abigail had forgotten he could hear them. He turned. The movement was slow. That made it more dangerous. The women saw him. Their smiles disappeared. Graham crossed the shop. Abigail stepped between him and the counter. His eyes were not on her. "Graham." He stopped. The entire shop had gone quiet. Abigail caught the sleeve of his coat. "Not hard. Just enough. Don't." His gaze dropped to her hand, then to her face. "Move." "No." They said, "I heard them." His jaw tightened. "Then let me. Don't fight battles I've already survived." That stopped him. For a moment, something almost painful moved across his face. Not pity, something angrier. He looked past her at the women, then back at Abigail. She released his sleeve. "Help me with the blue flannel." Graham stood very still. Then he picked up the bolt. "How much?" 6 yards. The clerk began measuring it with suddenly trembling hands. Nobody laughed. They finished their shopping without another word. Outside, Abigail carried the parcel toward the wagon. Graham followed. The cold felt sharper after the shop. He loaded the cloth, then rested both hands against the wagon bed. Abigail waited. He looked toward the street instead of at her. "Surviving it doesn't make it right." She said nothing. He finally turned. "You know that?" Abigail looked down at the receipt in her hand. "Yes." "Then why do you act like it doesn't matter? Because if I stopped every time somebody decided my body was public property for their opinion, I'd never get anything done." Graham's mouth tightened. "That isn't an answer. It's the only one I have." He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Not agreement. Acceptance. They stopped at the feed warehouse before leaving town. The clerk there weighed 2 sacks of mineral salt and wrote the total on a narrow receipt. Abigail checked the figures. "You overcharged us 12 cents. The man blinked. Graham leaned against the counter. "She'll find it." The clerk recalculated. Abigail was right. On the road home, snow began falling in small, dry flakes. For a while, neither spoke. The wagon seat was built for 2 ordinary-sized people. Graham was not ordinary-sized. Neither was Abigail. Their shoulders touched every time the right wheels struck a rut. The first time, Abigail shifted toward the edge. The second, Graham moved closer to his side. By the 3rd mile, neither bothered. At Miller Creek, the wagon tilted again. This time, Graham's arm came behind her. He did not touch. Abigail could feel the warmth of him through their coats. The wheel dropped into a rut. Her shoulder pressed against his chest. Neither moved immediately after the wagon straightened. Graham looked down. Abigail looked ahead. Snow collected along the brim of her bonnet. "Those boys," she said after a while. "What boys?" "The ones in Bowen's." He grunted. "You saw them. I always see them." The reins shifted in his hands. "When I was 14, grown men used to ask my father how much feed it took to keep me." Abigail turned slightly. He kept his eyes on the road. "One rancher offered him money to have me stand beside a prize bull for a photograph. Said people would pay to see which one was bigger." Abigail's mouth went tight. "What did your father do?" "Broke the man's camera." She almost laughed. "Sounds expensive." It was. Graham glanced at her. Daniel laughed about it for 10 years. There it was. His brother. Briefly. Naturally. Not like a wound being displayed. Abigail looked at the road again. "My mother used to tell people I was built for work." Graham frowned. "Did that help?" "Sometimes." "And the rest?" "It taught me to be useful." He was quiet. Abigail heard the runners of a distant sleigh somewhere across the valley. Then Graham said, "Useful isn't the same as worthy." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She pretended to adjust her glove. "No." The ranch gate appeared before dusk. Owen came out to help unload. Lucy followed wearing Graham's old hat, which dropped over both ears. Graham jumped down. He reached up for the flour. Abigail handed him the sack. Their fingers brushed. Small thing. Neither pulled away quickly. Lucy pointed at the blue flannel. "Is that for your dress?" "Your brother's shirts." Owen groaned. "I don't need shirts. You need sleeves that reach your wrists." Graham carried the flour toward the house. Abigail watched him go. The man people called an ox had spent the whole day controlling strength he could easily have used, and he had watched her do the same. For the first time, Abigail wondered whether that was why being beside him had begun to feel different. Not because he failed to see what everyone else saw, because he saw it, and refused to let it be the whole story. The wind came down hard from the mountains 3 nights later. It started before supper with a low moan along the eaves, then sharpened after dark until loose snow hissed against the windows like handfuls of sand. Abigail was in the kitchen cutting dried apples when the first shutter slammed. The sound cracked through the house. Lucy jumped. Owen looked up from the table. Graham was already on his feet. West side. Another shutter banged, then another. He reached for his coat. Abigail put down the knife. "I'm coming." "No." She looked at him. He stopped fastening his coat. "The wind's worse than it sounds. So are those shutters. I can handle them." "I know." That answer gave him pause. Abigail pulled on her wool coat. Graham watched her tie the bonnet strings beneath her chin. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not." She lifted the small toolbox from beside the pantry door. "I'm protecting the windows." Outside, the cold struck hard enough to steal breath. Snow moved sideways across the yard, thin and fast. Lantern light jumped wildly over the wall as Graham carried it toward the west side of the house. 2 shutters had torn free at the bottom hinges. A third twisted against the boards with every gust. Graham planted the ladder beneath it. "I'll go up." Abigail caught the side rail. "You hold. I'll nail." He stared at her. "You weigh more than I do. That is not how ladders work." For a second, despite the wind. His face almost softened. Then he handed her the hammer. All right. Abigail climbed. The ladder shook. Graham wrapped one large hand around each side rail. Steady? Yes. She reached the shutter and drove one nail through the loosened hinge. The wind tore at her skirt. Another gust struck the house. Abigail flattened herself against the wall and waited it out. Below, Graham looked up. Come down. One hinge. Abigail, one hinge. His jaw tightened. She drove the second nail. Then the rung beneath her left boot cracked. There was no warning beyond the sharp snap of dry wood. Her foot dropped. The ladder shifted. Abigail gasped. Before she could grab the siding, Graham moved. One arm locked around her waist. The other caught beneath her thigh. The world turned. Then she was against him. Not falling. Not on the ground. Held. Completely. For one suspended second, neither of them spoke. Abigail's hammer had fallen into the snow. Graham's face was inches from hers. His breath came fast from the sudden movement. His arm remained around her waist, solid and careful at the same time. Abigail could feel the strength in him. Not the kind people joked about in town, the controlled kind. The kind that stopped exactly where it needed to. His eyes moved over her face. Are you hurt? That was all. No joke, no strained grunt, no surprise at her weight, no apology for touching her. Just the question. Abigail swallowed. No. You sure? Yes. Graham lowered her slowly until both boots were on the ground. His hands left her at once. The place where his arm had been felt suddenly cold. He stepped back. I should have checked the ladder. It looked sound. I should have checked. Graham. He looked at her. I'm fine. The wind snapped the loose shutter again. Abigail looked at the house. Then at the broken rung. We still have a problem. I'll get the taller ladder from the barn. You're not climbing alone. He opened his mouth. Abigail raised one eyebrow. He closed it. They finished the shutters together. By the time they came inside, both were covered in snow. Helen had set towels near the stove. Lucy was waiting in her nightdress. Did you fall? No. Uncle Graham said a bad word. Graham took off his gloves. I did not. I heard it through the wall. Owen looked delighted. What word? Bed, Helen said. Owen groaned. Lucy disappeared upstairs. Abigail removed her coat. Graham reached for it automatically. She let him take it. He hung it near the stove. Another small thing. That night, Abigail slept badly. Not because of the wind. Because every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the exact moment the rung snapped and Graham's arm came around her. More than that, she remembered what had not happened. No hesitation. No embarrassment. No look. She had spent most of her life knowing precisely when men became aware of her size. The quick glance. The calculation. The little tightening around the mouth. Graham had simply caught her. Morning came clear and bitter. The storm had blown itself east, leaving the ranch yard buried under fresh snow and the sky a hard blue. Abigail entered the kitchen, rubbing warmth into her hands. Then she stopped. The chair beside the stove looked different. She knew that chair. She had been avoiding it since arriving. Its wooden arms pressed painfully against her hips, and the seat narrowed toward the back. She usually chose the bench at the table instead. Now the arms were gone. The seat had been summoned with two smoothly joined boards. The edges were planed round. Fresh wood shone pale against the older frame. Abigail stood staring. From the back room came the scrape of a hand plane. She followed the sound. Graham was at the workbench near the mudroom, shaving a thin curl from a scrap of pine. Abigail leaned against the doorframe. "You ruined a perfectly good chair." He did not look up. Wasn't perfectly good. It sat upright. "So does a fence post. That doesn't make it furniture." His mouth moved. Abigail walked closer. "You did that this morning?" "Started last night." "When?" "After everyone went upstairs." She looked toward the kitchen. "Why?" Graham set the plane down. He wiped sawdust from his palm. "Because you never sit in it." Abigail said nothing. He continued, quieter. "You stand when the bench is full, or you drag the stool over. Thought maybe the chair was uncomfortable." Her throat tightened. She hated that he had noticed. She loved that he had noticed. Both feelings arrived together. "You could have asked." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Graham looked at the floorboards. "Figured asking might make you explain something that didn't need explaining." Abigail looked at him for a long moment, then toward the chair again. "It's wider." "Yes. And no arms. No need for them." She ran her fingers across the new wood. The join was clean. Graham had taken his time. When she looked back, he was watching her carefully now. Not for gratitude, for offense, as though her dignity mattered more than whether she liked the chair. Abigail sat. The seat fit, nothing pressed, nothing pinched. She leaned back. Graham waited. "Well, it's good." He nodded. "That's all?" She looked at him. "What were you expecting? Maybe less suspicion." "You've known me 3 weeks." "Fair." Abigail ran one hand over the smooth edge. "Thank you." His expression changed, very slightly. "You're welcome." Then she asked, "Why?" He frowned. "You already asked that." "No." "Why really?" Graham looked toward the kitchen window. Snowlight filled the room. For several seconds, he seemed to search for words he did not use often. Then he picked up the plane again. "Furniture ought to fit people," he said, "not the other way around." Abigail went still. Graham started working again, as if he had said nothing important. A curl of pine fell to the floor. Abigail looked down at her hands. She thought of dresses altered at the waist, until there was barely enough fabric left for the seams. Church pews, dining chairs with narrow arms, storekeepers offering cloth with smiles that lasted too long. Men who had made her body a joke before they knew her name. Then she looked at the broad back of the man at the workbench. Graham had not told her to fit the chair. He had changed the chair. She stood. He glanced over. "I said thank you. I heard you. I meant it. I know." That afternoon, they worked in the barn repairing a gate latch damaged by the storm. Owen handed tools. Lucy sat on an overturned bucket talking to a barn cat that wanted nothing to do with her. Helen appeared once with coffee in 4 mismatched mugs. At one point, Abigail reached for a wrench. Graham was already holding it out. Their fingers met. Neither pulled away immediately. Owen looked up. Graham let go first. Abigail took the wrench. No one said anything. That evening, after supper, Abigail chose the new chair beside the stove. Not the bench, not the stool. The chair. She sat with Lucy's mending in her lap while Graham worked on tack at the table. Once she looked up. He was looking at her. His eyes dropped back to the leather strap. Abigail threaded the needle. A little heat climbed into her face. She bent closer to the torn sleeve. Outside, the mountain wind had gone quiet. Inside, the house settled into its evening sounds. Fire. Thread pulling through cloth. A child turning pages. The faint scrape of Graham's knife against leather. And for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, Abigail looked at the giant cowboy and did not see the man who had rejected her. She saw the man who had noticed exactly where the world made her uncomfortable, and without asking her to become smaller, he had quietly made room. For the next several days, High Timber Ranch settled into the kind of routine that made trouble easier to miss. Snow stayed off the main road. The cattle fed well. Owen returned to full chores, though Abigail made him promise to stay away from frozen ponds until spring. Lucy practiced sums at the kitchen table and complained that numbers were less interesting than horses. Graham spent most mornings checking the herd before daylight. Abigail spent hers learning the ranch accounts. Helen had kept household expenses carefully until Daniel died. After April, the figures became scattered. Receipts had been folded into drawers. Feed purchases were written on scraps of paper. Several pages in the ranch ledger were blank. One afternoon, Abigail carried the account books into the kitchen and spread them across the table. Graham came in carrying a broken halter. "You're frowning." "I'm reading." "You always frown when you read?" "Only when the numbers deserve it." He hung his coat near the stove. "What did they do?" Abigail tapped a page. "This feed bill is higher than last winter. Hay cost more. Not enough to explain this." Graham leaned over her shoulder. He smelled of cold air, leather, and wood smoke. Abigail noticed, then immediately became interested in the ledger again. "Daniel bought additional mineral feed in February," Graham said. "Why?" "Preparing for expansion." "What expansion?" Graham went quiet. Abigail looked up. His eyes had shifted toward the window. "Graham?" He pulled out the chair across from her. "My brother wanted to increase the herd." "How much?" "Nearly a third." Abigail stared at him. "With winter pasture already this tight?" I argued the same thing. There was something underneath the words. She did not press. Instead, she turned another page. "Was there financing?" "Yes." "Bank?" "No." That answer made her stop. Graham rested his forearms on the table. A neighboring cattleman. Walter Briggs. Abigail knew the name. She had heard it twice in Pine Hollow. Once at the Mercantile, when someone mentioned Briggs buying acreage south of Miller Creek. Again at the feed warehouse when a clerk said Briggs controlled more cattle than anyone west of town. "How much?" Graham stood. "I'll get the papers." He returned from the office carrying a leather document case. The brass latch had gone green at the corners. He set it before Abigail. "Daniel kept this locked." "You've read it?" "Enough to know I don't like it." "That isn't the same thing." "No." Abigail opened the case. Inside were land records, cattle receipts, tax notices, and a folded contract bearing Daniel Foster's signature. The agreement was dated the previous February. Abigail read slowly. Graham remained standing. She reached the final page, then went back to the beginning. "You said you argued about this?" "More than once. He contracted 180 head." "Yes." "For inspection before winter?" "Yes." "And if High Timber fails to meet the number?" Graham's face hardened. Abigail read the clause again. "Briggs can place a lien against the upper meadow." "Yes." She looked toward the north window, though the meadow itself lay beyond the ridge. "The spring is up there. Best water on the ranch." So this was never only about cattle. Graham sat down. "No." Abigail folded her hands. "How long has Briggs wanted that meadow?" "Years. And Daniel signed anyway." Graham's chair creaked beneath him. He thought he could beat Briggs at his own game. The words came flat. Abigail heard the old argument inside them. My brother was good with cattle, better than me in some ways. But when somebody told Daniel something couldn't be done, he took it personally. Graham looked at the contract. He liked proving people wrong. Abigail did not say that sometimes proving people wrong became another way of letting them control you. She suspected Graham already knew. How many healthy cattle do you have now? 194. Then what's the problem? We had 207 3 weeks ago. Abigail's eyes narrowed. What happened to the 13? 3 sold. 1 broke a leg. The rest have been losing condition. All from the same group? Mostly lower pasture. Abigail looked toward the pantry door. A thought had arrived. Not yet a conclusion. Show me. They saddled 2 horses before sunset. Graham tried to give Abigail the calmer gray mare. She chose a stocky chestnut instead. You sure? Does she bite? No. Then I'm sure. His eyes moved over the saddle. Stirrups might need. I can adjust stirrups. He nodded. Right. They rode south across the lower pasture. Snow lay thin where the cattle had trampled it. The animals moved slowly through scattered hay, steam lifting from their backs in the fading light. Abigail watched them. At first she saw nothing. Then she noticed a red heifer standing apart. Its head hung lower than the others. Another cow nearby showed the same dullness. Those 2? Graham nodded. And 3 more beyond the rise. Abigail rode closer. She watched the cattle walk, watched them nose the hay, watched one turn away from the feed and start downhill. Where are they going? Water. They followed. The lower channel came from a narrow creek above the south fence, crossed the pasture through a shallow cut, then widened near a wooden trough Graham had built years earlier. Several cattle stood there drinking. Abigail dismounted. Graham did the same. She crouched near the bank. The water looked wrong. Not dirty exactly. Slow. Was this channel always this shallow? Graham looked upstream. No. When did you last check it? 3 weeks ago. He walked several yards along the bank. Abigail followed. The channel narrowed beneath a stand of willow and pine. Water moved around a dark mass wedged between 2 stones. Graham stopped. That wasn't there. Branches had been packed into the channel, not storm debris. Packed. Rocks held the branches down. Rotting brush filled the gaps, slowing the current until stagnant water pooled downstream. Abigail stared at it. Could cattle have done this? No. Beavers? No cut marks. Graham stepped into the shallow edge and pulled at one branch. It did not move. Whoever built the blockage had worked at it. He pulled harder. The branch came free with a wet crack. Water rushed through the opening. Abigail moved along the bank. Something near the mud caught her eye. Graham. He looked. She pointed. A boot print. Then another, fresh enough that the edges had not frozen hard. Graham climbed out of the channel. His face had changed. The quiet man from the kitchen was gone. Not replaced by rage, by attention. The kind that made him seem larger. Abigail looked toward the ridge. Who comes through here? Ranch hands. Me. Owen sometimes. Briggs's people? Not legally. She met his eyes. The wind moved through the pines above them. Graham looked down at the print. Could be anybody, yes. You think it's Briggs. I think Walter Briggs benefits if your cattle fail inspection. That isn't proof, no. Abigail stood. And I'd rather live with a careful man than an angry fool. He looked at her. The tension in his jaw eased by a fraction. Is that what I am now? Careful? No. A man you'd rather live with. Abigail went still. Graham seemed to realize what he had said. Neither moved. Then a cow bawled from the trough. Abigail looked away first. I meant on the same ranch. Of course. His answer came too quickly. She mounted without asking for help. The ride back was quieter. Darkness settled before they reached the barn. Owen came out carrying a lantern. You find anything? Graham took the reins from Abigail's horse. Blocked water channel. Storm? No. The boy frowned. Then what? Graham looked toward Abigail. She could tell he was deciding how much to say. Someone put it there. Owen's lantern went still. Who? We don't know. Abigail slid down from the saddle. Her boots hit the frozen ground. She looked toward the house where warm light shone from the kitchen window, and Lucy's small shadow moved behind the curtain. Behind them stretched hundreds of acres of dark pasture, fence lines, timber, water, places a person could enter without being seen. Graham stood beside her holding both horses. He looked toward the southern ridge. What? Abigail asked. He was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, I thought Briggs was waiting for us to fail. And now? Graham looked at the muddy boot print dried along the edge of his own boot. Now I think somebody's helping him. The kitchen door opened. Helen called that supper was getting cold. Graham handed Owen the reins. Then he waited for Abigail to walk toward the house before following. Not ahead of her. Not behind. Beside her. And for the first time since Abigail had arrived at High Timber, the danger surrounding the Foster family no longer felt like something waiting in the future. Someone had already crossed the fence. Graham was awake before dawn. Abigail knew because when she came into the kitchen at 5:30, his coffee mug was already empty, and his coat was gone from the peg. Outside, a lantern moved through the lower pasture. She watched it from the window until Helen came downstairs. He's checking the fences? And the water? Helen rubbed her hands together over the stove. He won't say it, but he'll check every acre himself now. Abigail set oats to boil. That could take days. Helen gave her a tired look. You've met him. By breakfast, Graham had found nothing else disturbed. No cut fence, no missing cattle, no second blockage. That should have eased things. It didn't. A single deliberate act was harder to dismiss when there was no obvious accident beside it. Graham came inside with frost in his beard and mud frozen along the bottoms of his trousers. Owen looked up immediately. Find tracks? Nothing useful. What about south fence? Fine. I can ride the east line after breakfast. No. Owen's spoon stopped. I know that fence better than Ned. You're staying near the house. I'm not Lucy. No one said you were. You're treating me like it. Graham removed his gloves one finger at a time. Owen, I can help. You can help by doing what I asked. The boy shoved back from the table. His chair scraped hard across the floor. I'm not a child. Graham's face closed. You are 12. Owen stared at him, then walked out. The back door slammed. Helen flinched. Abigail looked toward Graham. He was still holding one glove. You might try saying less. He turned. You think that was too much? I think he stopped hearing you after 12. Graham looked toward the door. He's trying to prove he's grown. No. Abigail poured coffee into his mug. He's trying to prove something. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't. Graham studied her. Before he could answer, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. A moment later, Ned Collins stepped into the mudroom. Ned had worked high timber for nearly 4 years. He was a narrow man in his late 30s with sandy whiskers and shoulders bent slightly forward from years in the saddle. He usually came through the door talking. That morning he did not. Graham noticed. "You find something?" Ned removed his hat. "No." His eyes went briefly toward Abigail, then away. Graham set down his mug. "What is it?" Ned rubbed his thumb along the hat brim. "Need to talk." The kitchen went quiet. Helen gathered Lucy's bowl and guided her toward the front room. Abigail started to follow. Graham said, "Stay." Ned looked at him. Graham's expression did not change. "She's part of this ranch." Abigail's hand paused around the back of a chair. She sat. Ned remained standing. "I know something about Briggs." Graham's jaw tightened. "How much?" Ned looked toward the window. "More than I ought to." Silence stretched. Then Ned reached into his coat and placed $3 silver on the table. Abigail stared at them. Graham did not. "How long?" Ned swallowed. "Since October." Helen, halfway through the front room doorway, stopped. Graham's voice dropped. "You've been taking money from Briggs." "Yes." Owen appeared outside the window. He had been carrying kindling. He stopped when he saw Ned. No one inside noticed him. Abigail did. She said nothing yet. Graham leaned forward. "For what?" "Information." "What information?" "When cattle moved." "Which pasture?" "When you planned to repair fence." "Where the herd would winter." Graham stood. The table seemed smaller with him beside it. Ned took one step back. Abigail watched Graham's hands. Open. Still. "That mattered. You told Briggs about my ranch. My wife's been sick." Graham said nothing. Ned pressed on quickly. "Doctor in Pine Hollow says she needs treatment in Denver." "I don't have Denver money." Briggs knew. "So he bought you." The words landed harder than shouting. Ned's face went red. "I never touched the cattle." "Did you block the water?" "No." "Did you let someone through that fence?" "No." "Did you give Briggs a map?" "No." "What did you give him?" "Talk. That's all." Graham took one step closer. Ned looked at Abigail as if she might stop him. She didn't. He had to tell the truth without hiding behind her. Then Ned said, "There's something else." Graham stopped. Ned's eyes moved toward the window. Owen was no longer there. "He's been talking to the boy." The room changed. Helen came back into the kitchen. "What boy?" Ned looked at her. "Owen." Graham's face went blank. "Explain." "I saw Briggs with him twice near the old South Road." "When?" "Last month. Then again 5 days ago." Helen gripped the doorframe. "What was Owen doing with Walter Briggs?" "I don't know all of it." "You know enough to be standing here," Abigail said. Ned looked at her. He asked questions about Daniel. Graham's breath slowed. Abigail saw it. The dangerous kind of calm. "What questions?" Graham asked. "About the accident. About the cattle run. About you and Daniel arguing before he left." Helen covered her mouth. Graham's eyes narrowed. "How does Briggs know about that?" Ned looked down. "People knew you two had words." "You told him." "I mentioned it months ago." Graham turned away. For 1 second his hand gripped the back of a chair. Wood creaked. Then he let go. Abigail stood. "Where's Owen?" Everyone looked around. The kindling lay outside near the chopping block. The boy was gone. They found him in the tack room behind the barn. He was sitting on an overturned feed crate with a bridle across his lap, pretending to oil the leather. Graham entered first. Abigail followed several steps behind. Helen stayed in the yard. Owen did not look up. Graham shut the tack room door. "You've been meeting Walter Briggs." The boy's hand stopped. "No." "Ned saw you." Owen's chin lifted. So? So you lied." "I didn't tell you anything." "That's not better." Owen threw the rag onto the crate. "He tells me things you won't." Graham went still. "What things?" "About Pa." Abigail watched Owen's face. There it was. Not defiance. Fear wearing defiance's coat. Graham stepped closer. "What did he tell you?" "That you hated the cattle expansion." "I did." "That you and Pa fought." "We argued. He said you told Pa he'd ruin the ranch." Graham looked away once. Owen's voice grew sharper. "Did you?" "Yes." The answer surprised the boy. It surprised Abigail, too. Graham looked back at him. "I said worse than that." Owen's eyes filled, but he blinked hard. "Briggs said Pa took the North Wagon Trail because you refused to go with him." "That's not true. He said you could have stopped him." "Owen, he said everybody knew you wanted to be the one running high timber." Graham flinched as if struck. Abigail moved half a step forward. Not between them. Closer. Owen stood. "You always thought you were smarter than him." "Sometimes I was." The boy's face twisted. "You hated him." "No." "You fought with him." "Yes." "You let him leave." Graham's voice hardened. "Yes." That one word broke something. Owen shoved the bridle off his lap. It hit the floor. "You don't know anything. I know Briggs is using you." "No, he isn't. He tells you what hurts because it keeps you coming back." "Stop talking like I'm stupid. I didn't say you were stupid. You think I'm a child." "You are a child." Owen's face changed. Abigail closed her eyes briefly. There it was again. The wrong sentence at the wrong time. Owen's voice cracked. "I was old enough when Pa died." Graham stared at him. "What?" The boy's hands clenched. Abigail saw his knuckles whiten. "Owen." He looked at her. Her voice stayed quiet. "You don't have to shout." That did it. He shouted anyway. "I was supposed to go." The barn seemed to stop breathing. Graham's face emptied. Owen was shaking now. "Pa wanted me with him that morning. Said I was old enough to help with the wagon team." Helen appeared in the tack room doorway. She had heard. Owen saw her. Tears filled his eyes. "I didn't want to go. It was cold. I wanted to stay home." Helen whispered, "Oh, Owen." "So Pa took Mr. Dale instead." Graham shook his head slowly. "That had nothing to do. Mr. Dale didn't know the trail." "He did. He didn't know that washout." "Owen, if I went, Pa wouldn't have taken him. That is not how it happened." "You don't know." "I do." "How?" "Because I was there before they left." The boy stared at him. Graham's voice softened. "I saw Daniel check the wagon. I saw Dale check the traces. Your father made his own choice." Owen's mouth trembled. "I made him change it." "You stayed home." "I made him change it." "You were a child." The words came too quickly. Owen froze. Graham heard them after they were already said. Abigail saw that too. Owen stepped backward. His face went completely still. Not angry anymore. Worse. Right. Owen. Just a child. I didn't mean... The boy pushed past him. Helen reached for him. He slipped around her. By the time Graham got outside, Owen was already running toward the lower corral. Owen! The boy vaulted the gate. His bay gelding stood saddled beneath the shed roof. Graham stopped dead. Abigail's stomach tightened. You told him not to ride. I did. Owen swung into the saddle. Graham ran. The boy kicked the horse forward. Owen, stop! The gelding shot through the open corral gate and onto the north track. Graham reached the fence as horse and rider disappeared beyond the first rise. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Helen made a small sound behind Abigail. Where would he go? Graham stared at the empty trail. The wind had begun turning. Abigail felt the first flake land against her cheek. Graham looked toward the mountains. Gray clouds were closing over the ridge. Nobody goes that direction this time of year, he said. Abigail watched another snowflake settle on his coat, then another. Graham turned toward the barn. Get my saddle. Ned ran. Abigail looked at the darkening mountains. Owen had ridden away angry. Snow had begun to fall, and somewhere beyond the north ridge waited miles of timber, broken trails, abandoned cabins, and cold enough to kill a grown man who guessed wrong about shelter. Graham pulled on his gloves. For the first time since Abigail had known him, his hands were shaking. Which way would he go? She asked. North trail first, maybe toward the old trapping road. Ned came out of the barn carrying Graham's saddle and bridle. I'll ride with you. Graham took the saddle from him. No. Ned stopped. I helped cause this. Yes. The word landed hard. Graham lifted the saddle onto his horse. But you're staying here. Check every fence. Keep swamp the cattle close. If Owen circles back, I want somebody waiting. Ned nodded once. Abigail was already moving toward the tack room. Graham saw her. No. She kept walking. He caught up in 3 strides. Abigail. I heard you the first time. Then act like it. She turned. Snow gathered in Graham's beard almost as quickly as it landed. Helen needs you here. Helen needs her son back. So do I. His voice cracked at the edge. Abigail looked at him. For a moment, the giant cowboy looked less like the man who could lift a grown calf out of mud, and more like someone standing at the edge of something he remembered too well. She softened her voice. That is exactly why I'm going. You don't know those mountains. You do. The storm's moving fast. I can see that. You could get hurt. So could you. His jaw tightened. That's different. No. It is. Why? Because I know what I'm doing. Abigail stared at him. And I don't? That isn't what I said. It's what you meant. Graham dragged a hand down his face. This is not the time. No, it isn't. She stepped closer. You do not get to decide when I belong to this family and when I don't. The words came out before either of them was ready for them. Graham went still. Abigail did too. Behind them, Helen stood on the porch with Lucy pressed against her side. No one spoke. Snow hissed softly across the frozen yard. Abigail looked away first. I'll take the chestnut. Graham's mouth opened, then closed. He nodded. Wear the heavier coat. That was his surrender. They left within 15 minutes. Helen packed biscuits, jerky, and 2 blankets into a canvas roll. Graham tied a lantern to his saddle and carried a coil of rope, a hatchet, and matches wrapped in oilcloth. Abigail pulled on Helen's heavier wool cloak over her own coat. Lucy came down the porch steps. "Bring him back." Abigail crouched. "We will." Lucy looked at Graham. "Promise?" Graham's face tightened. He did not lie. "I'll do everything I can." Lucy's lower lip trembled. Abigail touched her cheek. Then she mounted. The north trail climbed immediately beyond the ranch. At first, Owen's tracks were easy to follow. Fresh hoof marks punched deep into the new snow. Graham rode ahead, bent low over the saddle horn, reading the ground. Abigail followed close enough to see the strain in his shoulders. They crossed the first ridge before the light began fading. The snow thickened. Wind moved through the pines in long, low gusts. Graham stopped beside a fork in the trail. One set of tracks continued north. Another cut west. He dismounted. Abigail watched him crouch. "Well?" "North." "You're sure?" "No." He mounted again. It was the first time she had heard him admit uncertainty that quickly. They rode on. Twice they found broken branches. Once Graham saw a dark shape beyond the trees and kicked his horse forward, only to discover a fallen stump covered in snow. When he came back, his hands shook again as he gathered the reins. Abigail pretended not to notice. An hour later, they found Owen's scarf caught on a pine branch. Graham pulled it free. Dark blue wool, frozen stiff along one edge. He held it for several seconds, then tucked it inside his coat. "He came this way." "Yes." "Why would he go farther up?" Abigail looked at the slope. "To get away." Graham's eyes closed briefly. The trail narrowed into timber. They could no longer ride side by side. Branches scraped Abigail's shoulders. Snow collected on her bonnet and melted down the back of her neck. At one point, her horse stumbled on a buried root. Graham turned immediately. "You all right?" "Yes." "Sure?" "Yes." He waited until her horse steadied before moving again. The temperature dropped with the light. By 7, darkness filled the trees. Graham lit the lantern. Its glow reached only a few yards. The rest of the mountain disappeared. They found another set of tracks near a frozen creek. Graham dismounted. Abigail joined him. Horse slipped here. The snow was churned. One deep mark angled toward the bank. Graham followed it, then stopped. "What?" He crouched beside something dark, half covered by snow. A leather strap, part of a rein. Abigail's stomach tightened. "Owen's." "Yes." Graham stood too quickly. "Owen!" His voice tore through the timber. No answer. Again. "Owen!" Only wind. They pushed farther north. The horses moved more slowly now. Abigail's hands had gone numb inside her gloves. She could no longer feel her toes properly. Still, she said nothing. Graham turned in the saddle every few minutes to check that she remained behind him. At one point he stopped. "You need to tell me if you're too cold." "So do you." "I mean it." "So do I." Even then, something almost like frustration crossed his face. Then he nodded. "Fair." Near 9, the storm eased just enough for the clouds to lighten. Moonlight filtered through them. Graham pointed ahead. "Old trapper's cabin." Abigail saw it only after he spoke. A low shape beneath the trees. Roof half buried, one shutter hanging crooked. They rode closer. Graham suddenly pulled up. There. A horse stood beneath the trees beyond the cabin. Owen's bay. Saddle empty. Reins dragging. Graham was off his horse before Abigail could speak. "Owen!" He ran toward the cabin. Abigail dismounted and followed. There were tracks near the door. Boot marks. One dragged unevenly. Graham shoved the door open. The cabin was dark. Empty. His breath caught. Then Abigail heard something. Not inside. Behind the building. A faint sound. She grabbed Graham's sleeve. "Wait." He looked at her. "Listen." There. A groan. Graham ran around the cabin. Owen lay beside a fallen log, half covered in snow. His hat was gone. One leg bent beneath him at an angle that made Abigail's stomach turn. Graham dropped to his knees. "Owen." The boy's eyes opened weakly. "Uncle?" Graham reached for him. Abigail caught his arm. "Don't." He turned on her. "He's freezing, I know. I'm carrying him inside." "No." His face hardened. "Abigail, look at his leg." Graham looked. Really looked. His breath stopped. Owen tried to move and cried out. Graham's entire body went rigid. Abigail knelt beside the boy. "Owen, don't move. It hurts, I know. My horse threw me, I know." "Uncle Graham, I'm here." Graham's voice was so low Abigail nearly missed it. Owen reached toward him. Graham took the boy's hand. Abigail touched Owen's boot gently. The lower leg had begun swelling. Could be broken. Graham looked at her. His face had gone pale beneath the windburn. What do we do? For once, no argument, no instinct to take over. Just the question. Abigail looked toward the cabin. "We move him carefully. Together." She pointed. "You support his shoulders and back. I'll keep the leg steady." Graham nodded. Anything she said now, he would do. They worked slowly. Owen whimpered once as they lifted him. Graham's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek, but his hands stayed gentle. Inside the cabin, Abigail cleared an old bunk while Graham held Owen. There was a stone hearth, dry wood stacked beneath the table, a rusted coffee pot, 2 cracked stools. Enough. Graham lowered Owen onto the bunk. Abigail covered him with both blankets. Fire. Graham moved immediately. His hands were built for strength, but now they fumbled once with the matches. Abigail saw it. She did not comment. The flame caught. Small at first, then stronger. Orange light climbed the stone wall. Graham returned to Owen. The boy's face twisted. "I'm sorry." Graham froze. "For what?" "I shouldn't have left." "No. I didn't mean no." Graham knelt beside the bunk. "We're not doing that now." Owen turned his face away. Abigail began removing the boy's wet outer coat. Outside, the storm thickened again. Snow struck the cabin walls. Graham looked toward the door, then toward Abigail. "We can't ride him back tonight." "No." Helen and Lucy were 6 miles away. The trail behind them was disappearing by the minute. High Timber Ranch might as well have been on the other side of the world. Graham sat beside Owen. Abigail knelt by the hearth, warming her hands. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then Owen whispered, "Does Mama know?" Graham swallowed. "She knows we came after you. She'll be mad." "Yes." The boy almost smiled. Graham bowed his head. Abigail watched the firelight move over his face. The strongest man she had ever known sat beside a frightened child and looked as though one wrong breath might break him. Outside, the mountain had closed around them. Inside, there was nowhere left for any of them to run. The trapping cabin smelled of old pine, damp wool, and smoke. Graham fed another split log into the hearth while Abigail worked beside the bunk. Owen's boot had to come off, slowly. Abigail loosened the laces one at a time, then looked at Graham. "Hold his knee steady." Graham sat beside the boy. Owen's fingers closed around his uncle's sleeve. "I'm all right." "No, you're not," Abigail said. Owen looked at her. "But you will be if you stop trying to impress everybody." His mouth tightened. For once, he did not argue. Abigail eased the boot free. The boy sucked in a sharp breath. Graham's hand tightened around his shoulder. "I'm here." Owen shut his eyes. The swelling was worse than Abigail had hoped, but the skin had not broken. She ran her fingertips lightly along the lower leg. Owen flinched near the ankle. "Can you move your toes?" He did. "Good." Graham looked at her. "That means—" "It means I'm less worried than I was 5 minutes ago." She glanced around the cabin. A broken shelf hung crooked beside the wall. "Take that down." Graham stood. He did not ask why. He pulled the shelf free, split 2 straight lengths from it with his knife, and handed them to her. Abigail wrapped Owen's leg carefully with strips torn from an old blanket and tied the makeshift supports in place. When she finished, sweat had gathered along her hairline despite the cold. Graham watched every movement. "You've done this too? Boarding house." He gave her a look. "What kind of boarders did your mother take?" "The kind who could pay." That almost earned a smile. "Almost." Owen opened his eyes. "Can we go home now?" Graham looked toward the door. Wind pushed loose snow beneath it in a thin white line. "Not tonight." Owen's face fell. "Mama's going to worry." "She already is." Graham sat again. "So we make sure you get home in one piece." Abigail brought the last blanket higher around Owen's shoulders. Then she handed him a small piece of biscuit. "Eat." "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway." He stared at her. She stared back. He ate. Graham turned toward the fire so the boy would not see his mouth move. An hour passed, then another. The storm showed no sign of weakening. Graham melted snow in the coffee pot and warmed the last of the jerky near the hearth. Abigail sat on one of the cracked stools, wringing water from the hem of her skirt. Owen had gone quiet. Too quiet. Graham noticed too. "You awake?" "Yes." "What are you thinking?" "Nothing." Abigail looked at Graham. He looked back. Neither believed him. Graham reached into his coat and took out Owen's scarf. He placed it beside the boy. Found that halfway up. Owen touched the frozen edge. "I lost it." "I know." Silence. Then Owen said, "You should have let me stay gone." Graham's head lifted. Abigail stopped moving. "What did you say?" The boy looked at the wall. "I just make everything worse." "No. Pa's dead." "Owen, you and Mama fight because of me. We do not. You're always watching me. Because you keep doing things like riding into a mountain storm." Owen's face tightened. Graham heard the edge in his own voice and stopped. Abigail set the wet cloth aside. "Let him finish." Graham looked at her. She nodded once. He sat back. Owen swallowed. "I was supposed to go with Pa." No one interrupted. "I told you that." "Yes," Graham said, "but that's not all." The fire cracked. Owen stared at his hands. "Pa asked me twice." His voice had gone small. "First time at breakfast, then outside by the wagon." Abigail watched Graham's face. He had become completely still. I told him I didn't want to freeze all day. I wanted to stay and help Ned with the colts. Owen's mouth twisted. So Pa took Mr. Dale. That doesn't make what happened your fault. If I'd gone, he wouldn't have been there. Maybe. Owen looked at him sharply. Graham did not retreat from the word. Maybe the day would have been different. Abigail held her breath. Graham continued. But different doesn't mean your father lives. Owen's eyes filled. You don't know that. No. His voice lowered. I don't. That honesty broke something open. The boy looked away. Graham leaned forward. There are things we don't get to know. Owen wiped one eye angrily. That's easy for you. No. Graham's hand fell to his knee. No, it isn't. Abigail saw the change in him before Owen did. The way his shoulders dropped. The way his eyes went to the fire. Graham had spent weeks carrying something just as carefully as Owen. He spoke without looking up. Your father and I fought that morning. Owen froze. Graham rubbed his thumb across the heel of his palm. He wanted to move the cattle north before the weather turned. Because of Briggs? Partly. I told him the wagon trail was bad. Told him he was rushing. Owen stared. Graham's jaw worked once. He told me I was afraid of every decision I didn't make myself. A faint sound escaped him. Not laughter. Wasn't entirely wrong. Abigail said nothing. Graham continued. I told him if he wanted to wreck the ranch trying to prove something, he could do it without me. Owen's eyes widened. He left angry? Yes. You let him? Yes. Why? Graham finally looked at him. Pride. One word. No excuse around it. I thought he'd come back by supper and we'd argue again. His eyes shifted toward the fire. He didn't. Owen's face crumpled. Graham's voice grew rough. I have spent every day since wondering what would have happened if I'd followed him. The boy stared at him. You think it was your fault too? Graham breathed out. Some days. The room went quiet. Outside, wind dragged across the roof. Owen's lower lip shook. But you said it wasn't mine. It isn't. Then how can it be yours? Graham looked at him for a long time. Then something in his face gave way. It probably isn't. Owen blinked. Graham leaned closer. But grief doesn't care much for probably. The boy's tears came then. Not loudly, just suddenly. He turned his face away. Graham reached for him, then stopped halfway. Abigail saw the hesitation. He was waiting. Owen looked at his uncle's hand, then grabbed him. Graham pulled him in, carefully around the injured leg. Owen buried his face against Graham's chest. Graham bent over him, one enormous hand covering the back of the boy's head. Neither tried to speak. Abigail turned toward the hearth. She added a small piece of wood that did not need adding, adjusted the coffee pot that did not need adjusting. Some moments were made smaller by witnesses. She gave them theirs. When Owen finally fell asleep, exhaustion took him quickly. Graham tucked the blanket beneath his shoulders and sat beside the bunk until his breathing evened. Abigail moved to the other side of the hearth. For a long time they listened to the storm. Then Graham said, I didn't ask for you. Abigail's fingers stopped around the coffee mug. The words hit harder here than they had at the stage stop. Perhaps because now they mattered more. She looked at him. His face was turned toward the fire. Is this really where you want to have that conversation? He frowned. No. Good. That came out wrong. Yes. He rubbed a hand over his beard. I meant that I didn't ask for any of this. Abigail's mouth tightened. That improves it only slightly. Graham looked at her. I didn't ask Helen to write that letter. I didn't ask for someone to come into the house. I didn't think we needed anybody. Abigail stared into her cup. And now? He was quiet. Now I don't know what that house looks like if you leave. Her eyes lifted. Graham held them. No smile. No attempt to soften the statement. Just truth. Abigail set the mug on the floor. That is not the same thing as wanting me. I know. It is not the same thing as loving me. I know. His answer came too quickly to be defensive. That unsettled her more than argument would have. She folded her hands. A person can become necessary without becoming loved. Graham looked toward Owen. I've been necessary to this family since Daniel died. He looked back at her. That doesn't mean I've done right by them. Abigail said nothing. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't know the difference yet. Between what? Needing somebody. His eyes stayed on hers, and choosing them. The fire popped. Abigail looked away. Graham's voice lowered. Then I suppose I'll have to learn the difference. She let out a slow breath. Don't practice on me. That time he did smile. Small, tired, real. I think it may be too late for that. Abigail looked at him. The smile disappeared, but the warmth behind it did not. Neither moved closer. Neither needed to. Owen slept between them and the door, wrapped in Graham's coat. Outside, snow buried the tracks that had led them there. Inside, the things that had stayed hidden for months had finally been spoken aloud. And for the first time, Graham Foster understood that saving his family might have less to do with carrying everyone on his back than with learning when to set the weight down. They returned to high timber the next afternoon. The storm had passed before dawn, leaving the mountains sharp and white beneath a pale sky. Graham built a drag from 2 pine poles and a blanket so Owen could ride the gentlest horse without putting weight on his injured leg. Abigail rode beside him the whole way down. By the time the ranch house came into view, Lucy was already running across the yard. Helen followed more slowly. She made it 3 steps off the porch before her hand went to her chest. Abigail noticed. Helen stopped, only for a second. Then she kept moving. Owen. The boy looked embarrassed by the tears in his mother's eyes. I'm all right. You left in a snowstorm. I know. You could have died. I know. Helen reached him and held his face between both hands. Then she struck his shoulder once. Not hard. Owen blinked. Helen pulled him against her. Graham looked away. Abigail did too. They got Owen upstairs and settled him with his leg raised on folded blankets. The nearest doctor was in Pine Hollow, and Graham sent Ned for him immediately. Ned took the fastest horse. He did not ask whether he was still employed. Graham did not say. The doctor arrived near supper, examined Owen, and confirmed what Abigail had hoped. A clean break below the knee. Painful, inconvenient, but likely to heal well if the boy stayed off it. Owen complained before the doctor had even finished wrapping the splint. That is encouraging, Abigail said. The doctor glanced at her. You the one who set him up there? I kept the leg from moving. You did a decent job. Graham looked at Abigail. She pretended not to notice. That evening should have brought relief. Instead, something in the house remained uneasy. Helen barely ate. Her spoon touched the broth twice, then stopped. Abigail watched her across the table. You're pale. I'm tired. You've been tired since I arrived. Helen lowered her eyes. Graham looked between them. Helen? I'm fine. Abigail's mouth tightened. She had heard those words too many times from women who thought saying them made them true. After supper, Helen stood to clear the table. She made it halfway to the stove before the plate in her hand tilted. Abigail rose. Helen? Helen caught the edge of the counter. Graham crossed the room so fast his chair fell backward. What's wrong? Nothing. You're holding your chest. I said nothing. Her knees softened. Graham caught her before she fell. Lucy screamed from the doorway. Helen opened her eyes almost immediately. I'm all right. Graham stared at her. No. I stood too quickly. No. His voice filled the room. Not loud. Final. Abigail brought a chair. Sit. Helen did. Perhaps because it was Abigail asking. Perhaps because she had finally run out of strength to pretend. Graham crouched in front of her. How long? Helen's face changed. Abigail knew the answer was going to hurt before she spoke. Since summer. Graham stood. What? Sometimes my chest hurts. Lucy came closer. Helen forced a smile at her. Go sit with Owen. I want to stay. Lucy. The child hesitated. Abigail took her hand. Go tell Owen the doctor said he has to drink another cup of broth. He'll be mad. Exactly. Lucy went. The moment she disappeared upstairs, Graham turned back. You've had chest pain since summer? And fainting spells. He stared at her. How many? I don't know, Helen. 6, maybe 7. His face went hard. You didn't tell me. You had enough. That was not your decision. Something flashed in Helen's eyes. No? Graham stopped. Helen gripped the chair arms. Daniel died. The ranch was falling behind. Owen stopped sleeping. Lucy cried every night. You were working 16 hours a day and pretending you weren't grieving because everybody else needed you. Her breathing became uneven. So yes, Graham, I decided you had enough. He looked away. Abigail stood very still. Helen looked at her next. I was afraid. Abigail waited. My mother died young. Heart trouble. The room seemed to shrink. Helen swallowed. I thought if the same thing was happening to me, the children would be left with Graham. Graham turned sharply. You say that like I'd abandon them. I knew you wouldn't. Then what? Helen's eyes filled. I knew you'd destroy yourself, trying not to. Graham had no answer. Helen looked at Abigail. And that is why I wrote the letter. Abigail's stomach tightened. Not again. Helen saw it. I wasn't looking for a wife for Graham. Graham closed his eyes. Abigail said nothing. I was looking for someone who could stay if I couldn't. The words landed slowly. Abigail heard the stove ticking, the wind rubbing against the kitchen window. Owen shifting upstairs. Helen continued. Someone who could manage a house? Someone who wouldn't frighten easily. Someone old enough to know hardship, but young enough to start again. Abigail's hands went cold. So you chose me because I sounded useful. Helen's face crumpled. I chose you because your letters were honest. My letters. You wrote that you could cook for 20 men without losing count. That you had sat beside 6 strangers through fever. That you had buried your mother and still kept the boarding house open because people depended on you. Helen looked down. I thought a woman who could do all that might survive us. Abigail stepped back from the table. There it was again. Useful, dependable, strong enough. Everything but wanted. Graham said quietly, "Abigail." She lifted one hand. "Not now." He stopped. Helen looked stricken. "I am sorry." "You should be." "I know." Abigail turned toward the pantry. She needed a door, a wall, a minute. Then came hoofbeats outside. Fast. Too fast for a neighbor making a social call. Graham heard them too, his head turned toward the window. A black carriage stopped near the gate. 2 riders came behind it. One wore a town coat instead of ranch clothes. The other was Walter Briggs. Graham's entire posture changed. "What does he want?" Abigail looked through the glass. "I doubt he came to ask after Owen." Briggs stepped down from the carriage. He was in his late 50s, neat gray beard, expensive wool coat, polished boots hardly marked by snow. He carried a leather folder beneath one arm. Ned had described him as a man who smiled while making people nervous. The description was accurate. Graham opened the door before Briggs could knock. "You're on my land." Briggs looked up at him. "That is precisely what we need to discuss." His gaze moved past Graham and found Abigail. Recognition. Assessment. Then Helen. "Mrs. Foster." Helen did not answer. Briggs removed his hat. "I'll keep this brief." He opened the leather folder. "The inspection deadline under Daniel Foster's cattle agreement has passed." Graham's face darkened. "You never sent an inspector." "My understanding is that the required herd was not delivered." "Delivered where?" Briggs smiled faintly. "To satisfy the contract." Abigail stepped closer. "What does the contract actually say?" His eyes shifted toward her. "This is business between landholders." "Then you won't mind answering." Graham glanced at Abigail. She held out her hand. "The contract." Briggs hesitated. Only slightly. That was enough. Abigail looked at Graham. "Office." They left Briggs standing in the front room while Graham retrieved Daniel's original agreement. Abigail carried it to the kitchen table. Briggs followed reluctantly. His attorney remained near the door. Abigail opened the document. She had read it before. This time she read every word. Slowly. Inspection clause. Date. Number of cattle. Location. She stopped. Read it again. Then looked up. "Graham." He came beside her. She pointed. The agreement did not require delivery to Briggs Ranch. It required the Foster herd to be made available for inspection at High Timber Ranch before the specified winter date. Nothing more. Abigail looked at Briggs. "When was your inspector here?" Briggs's smile disappeared. He was unable to attend. "When?" "That is irrelevant." "No." Abigail placed one finger on the contract. "It is the only thing that matters." Graham leaned over the page. Understanding moved across his face. "We sent notice twice," he said. Abigail looked at him. "What notice?" "I wrote Briggs in November. Again after Thanksgiving." "You kept copies?" "In the office." Briggs spoke quickly. The quality of the herd was already in question. "That wasn't what I asked," Abigail said. Graham returned with 2 folded letters. Abigail opened them. Both requested inspection at High Timber. Both were dated before the deadline. One carried a receipt from the Pine Hollow post office. The other bore a handwritten notation from Briggs's foreman acknowledging delivery. Abigail looked at Briggs. "You were notified." Briggs's lawyer stepped forward. "Miss Turner, you are not a party to this agreement." No. She pushed the papers toward Graham. But he is. Graham read them. His face became frighteningly calm. Briggs cleared his throat. The cattle were not in suitable condition. You never inspected them, Graham said. Reports suggested. Reports from who? Briggs glanced toward the door. Ned. They all knew it. Graham moved toward him. Briggs stepped back. The attorney did too. Abigail caught Graham's forearm. His muscles were hard beneath the sleeve. Graham. He looked down at her hand, then at Briggs. Every story Pine Hollow had ever told about Graham Foster seemed to gather in that moment. The giant, the brute, the ox, the man too large to be trusted with anger. Briggs wanted him angry, wanted him physical, wanted witnesses. Abigail tightened her fingers once. Not to hold him, to remind him. Graham breathed. His shoulders lowered. He stepped back. Briggs's face shifted, just enough to show disappointment. Graham saw it. So did Abigail. Then Graham said, very quietly, You came here expecting brute strength. Briggs said nothing. Graham placed both hands flat on the table. You'll have to deal with proof instead. Abigail released his arm. Briggs closed the leather folder. This matter will be decided formally. Good, Graham said. It won't end the way you think. Graham opened the front door. Then bring a judge. Briggs looked once at Abigail before leaving. Not dismissively now. Carefully. The carriage rolled away beneath a low winter sky. Graham stood on the porch until it disappeared. When he came back inside, Helen was still sitting near the stove. Abigail had not forgotten her confession. Neither had he, but now Daniel's contract lay open on the table beside the 2 inspection letters. One family secret had cracked the house open. Another threat had arrived before they could close it again. Abigail looked down at the clause Briggs had hoped nobody would read carefully. Graham came to stand beside her. His arm nearly touched hers. Neither moved away. For the first time that day, Abigail let herself lean against something. Not much, just the smallest weight of her shoulder against his sleeve. Graham did not look at her. He simply stayed there. Outside, Walter Briggs's carriage vanished beyond the south ridge. Inside, High Timber Ranch finally had something stronger than anger to fight him with. The truth was written in ink. The hearing was set for the following Thursday at the Pine Hollow Meeting Hall. Word traveled faster than the notice. By Wednesday afternoon, ranchers who rarely came to town in winter were finding reasons to stop at Bowen's Mercantile. Men lingered beside the livery stable longer than necessary. Women carried conversations out of the church vestibule and into the street. Walter Briggs had spent years building the kind of reputation that made people lower their voices around his name. Now people were saying it openly. High Timber Ranch, the contract, the blocked water, the foster boy. Abigail heard enough of it during one supply trip to know that Thursday would not be private. She spent the night before the hearing at the kitchen table. Daniel's contract lay open before her. Beside it were Graham's 2 inspection letters, the postal receipt, cattle counts from November and December, and a short statement Abigail had written from Ned's account of Briggs paying him for ranch information. Graham came downstairs after midnight. You're still awake. So are you. I heard papers. I heard floorboards. He poured water from the pitcher. Abigail rubbed her eyes. Graham looked at the neat stacks. You've checked those 4 times. 5. Anything change? No. Then maybe they're done. She leaned back. Across the room stood the chair he had rebuilt for her. He had never mentioned it again. Neither had she. She used it every evening. Abigail looked at the papers. What if Ned changes his mind tomorrow? He won't. You don't know that. No. Graham rested one hand on the table. But he rode to Pine Hollow today and gave his statement to the deputy clerk before anybody asked him to. Abigail looked up. He did? Graham nodded. He says Briggs can fire him from every ranch in Colorado if he wants. A pause. He also said he's tired of his wife seeing what kind of man he became trying to save her. Abigail folded the final document. People do strange things when they're scared. Graham's gaze stayed on her. Yes. She knew he was not talking only about Ned. Neither of them continued. Thursday morning was clear and bitter. The road to Pine Hollow glittered with frozen wagon tracks beneath the sun. Helen stayed home with Owen and Lucy. Before Abigail left, Owen called her upstairs. His leg rested in a fresh splint. You're going to beat him? That isn't how hearings work. It should be. Abigail adjusted the blanket over his foot. You concentrate on healing. Owen frowned. Then, quietly, tell Uncle Graham not to hit anybody. Abigail smiled despite herself. I think he knows. Graham heard from the doorway. I'm standing right here. Owen looked innocent. That's why I said it loud. The Pine Hollow meeting hall was already crowded when Abigail and Graham arrived. Benches had been arranged in rows. A coal stove glowed near the back wall. A county magistrate named Judge Russell sat behind a long table with spectacles low on his nose and Daniel's contract placed before him. Walter Briggs sat to the right with his attorney. Ned Collins sat alone on a rear bench. When Abigail entered, several heads turned. She felt the old instinct. Chin up, shoulders straight. Walk as if no one had the right to decide what your body meant. Then Graham stepped beside her. Not ahead. Beside. They took their seats. The hearing lasted nearly 3 hours. Briggs's attorney argued first. High Timber had failed to satisfy its cattle obligation. The herd had deteriorated. Briggs had acted within his rights as creditor. Then Graham's letters were introduced. The first requested inspection 12 days before the deadline. The second requested it again 5 days before. The postal receipt matched. Briggs's foreman had acknowledged the second. Judge Russell read the contract twice. Mr. Briggs, where does this agreement require delivery to your ranch? Briggs's attorney stood. The accepted business understanding. I asked what the agreement says. Silence. Judge Russell looked down. It says the cattle shall be presented for inspection at High Timber Ranch. He looked at Briggs. Did you inspect them? No. Did you send an agent? My foreman was occupied. Twice? Briggs shifted. Abigail watched him. The man who had looked so controlled in the Foster kitchen suddenly seemed bothered by the collar of his expensive shirt. Then Ned testified. He admitted taking Briggs's money, admitted sharing grazing schedules, admitted telling Briggs where the Foster cattle watered. Briggs's attorney rose sharply. Did Mr. Briggs instruct you to interfere with livestock? No. Did he tell you to obstruct a water channel? No. Walter Briggs relaxed slightly. Then Ned added, but I told him the lower channel was weak after a dry week. 2 days later, it was blocked. The room stirred. Judge Russell raised one hand. Quiet. Ned continued. And Mr. Briggs asked me more than once whether Owen Foster believed his uncle blamed Daniel for the accident. Graham's hands closed around his knees. Abigail saw it. She placed 2 fingers against his sleeve beneath the table. Nothing more. His hands opened. The final evidence came from neighboring rancher Henry Bell, who testified that Briggs had approached him months earlier asking what High Timber's upper meadow might be worth after the Fosters lost it. Briggs denied wrongdoing. His attorney objected. Judge Russell listened. Then he removed his spectacles. The lien claim is denied. No one moved. The judge continued. The contract required inspection at High Timber Ranch. The Foster family made documented requests for that inspection. Mr. Briggs failed to perform it. He looked toward the clerk. I am also forwarding the testimony regarding interference with High Timber livestock and improper pressure upon a minor to the county sheriff for further examination. Briggs stood. This is absurd. Judge Russell looked at him. Sit down. Briggs did. The room exhaled. Abigail realized she had been holding her breath. Graham turned toward her. For a second, neither smiled. Then his eyes softened. She allowed hers to do the same. Outside, people gathered around them, not cheering. Pine Hollow was not that kind of town. But Henry Bell shook Graham's hand. Mrs. Porter from the dry goods store pressed Abigail's fingers between both of hers and said, Good work. Even the clerk from Bowen's looked embarrassed when he nodded at Graham. Walter Briggs came down the courthouse steps last. He stopped near them. His face was pale with anger. This isn't over. Graham stood. Abigail felt every person around them become alert. Graham looked at Briggs, then simply said, Go home. Briggs left. No fists, no shouting. The giant cowboy did not give him the ending he wanted. High Timber Ranch survived winter. Not easily, but it survived. Ned remained long enough to finish his month's work before leaving with his wife for Denver. Graham paid every dollar owed and added enough for the train fare. Ned protested. Graham said, Don't make me explain, Charity. So Ned stopped asking. Helen finally agreed to see a physician in Denver. The letter came back in February. Her condition was serious enough to watch, but not the death sentence she had feared. Rest, regular examinations, fewer long days on her feet. Helen read the letter twice, then sat in Abigail's wide chair by the stove and cried quietly into both hands. Nobody told her to stop. Owen's leg healed. By March, he was walking with a stick and irritating everyone by pretending he did not need it. He spent mornings with Graham repairing tack and learning accounts, not because he had to become the man of the ranch, because he was 12 and Graham finally let 12 be enough. Lucy stopped asking whether Daniel had been afraid when he died. Instead, she began asking what he had been like when he was young. Helen told her. So did Graham. Some stories made them laugh. Others did not. They told them anyway. Then, on the first warm afternoon of March, Abigail said she was leaving. She told them at the kitchen table. Helen dropped her spoon. Lucy stared. Owen said, No. Graham said nothing. That hurt worst. Abigail folded her hands. I have an offer in Denver. What offer? Helen asked. A boarding house near the freight depot needs a manager. Mrs. Bell's sister knows the owner. Lucy's eyes filled. You live here? For now. You said spring. I did. Owen looked at Graham as if demanding he fix this. Graham still said nothing. Abigail forced herself to continue. This family is standing again. Helen frowned. Because of you. That is exactly why I have to know what I'm doing. Graham finally looked at her. She met his eyes. I will not stay because everyone needs me. The room became very quiet. I have done that before. Graham's face changed. Abigail continued. I spent 11 years being useful enough to keep a boarding house running. Then, the day the property belonged to somebody else, useful was not the same as belonging. Helen looked down. Abigail's voice softened. I love you. Lucy started crying. I love all of you. Then she looked at Graham. Her throat tightened. And that makes it more important, not less. Graham rose. Come outside. They walked to the porch. Snow remained in the shadows beneath the pines, but water dripped steadily from the roof. Graham leaned against the rail. You want to leave? I need to know I can. That isn't what I asked. Abigail looked at him. No. He nodded slowly. The hurt in his face was controlled, but not hidden. I could ask you to stay. Yes. I could tell you Helen needs you. Yes. The children need you. Yes, his eyes stayed on hers. I need you. Abigail's breath caught. Graham looked toward the pasture. But if you stay because I corner you, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering whether you wanted me or simply couldn't escape me. Abigail turned her face away. That was when the tears came, quietly. She wiped them before he could pretend not to see. Graham did not touch her. That was what made it unbearable. He let her choose even when choice might take her away. 3 weeks later, he drove her to Pine Hollow. The same stage stop, the same freight platform. Spring mud now showed between patches of snow. Her trunk sat behind the coach. Abigail wore the brown coat she had arrived in. Graham stood beside her with both hands in his pockets. Neither seemed able to say the right thing. The driver shouted, "Denver Route! Boarding!" Abigail looked at Graham. Take care of the chair. His mouth moved. It's your chair. Then don't let Lucy paint it. No promises. The driver lifted Abigail's trunk. She stepped toward the coach. 1 step, 2, 3, then stopped. Graham said nothing. Did not call her name. Did not reach for her. Abigail turned. He was exactly where she had left him. Waiting, not asking. Something inside her settled. She marched back across the platform. Graham's brows drew together. Forget something? Yes. She grabbed the front of his coat. Several people nearby stopped talking. Graham looked down at her hands, then at her. Abigail pulled his collar until the giant cowboy bent closer. You told me once you never asked for a plus-size bride. His eyes widened slightly. I remember. Good. Her voice shook. She hated that. Let it shake. I'm asking now. Graham stared at her. Abigail swallowed. The physician's husband. Someone behind them coughed. Abigail ignored it. You want it or not? For 1 second, Graham said nothing. Then he bent until his forehead rested against hers. Only if it's permanent. Abigail closed her eyes. That's the idea. His hand came to her cheek. Slowly, giving her every chance to move. She didn't. When they kissed, Pine Hollow did not disappear. The wagon wheels still rattled. A horse still stamped at the hitching rail. Someone dropped a crate near the mercantile. Life went on. That was what made it feel real. By summer, High Timber Ranch was noisy again. Helen complained from a porch chair while Abigail refused to let her carry firewood. Lucy sang off-key while setting the supper table. Owen and Graham argued over whether a saddle skirt needed replacing. It'll hold another season. It looks terrible. So do you. Abigail called from the kitchen. If either of you starts wrestling, supper goes to the dog. They stopped. Graham came through the back door. His boots were muddy. Abigail picked up the broom. He looked down, then quietly stepped backward and wiped them on the mat. Owen laughed from the table. Beside the stove sat the wide chair Graham had rebuilt months earlier. The wood was darker now where Abigail's hands rested on the arms that were no longer there. She sat in it every evening. Nobody thought about why it had been changed anymore. It simply belonged. So did she. High Timber Ranch was never restored to what it had been before Daniel died. It became something else, something louder, less careful, a little scarred, a little unfinished. A family that had learned an empty chair did not have to be filled by replacing the person who once sat there. And Abigail Turner, who had crossed half the country because she thought she needed someone to choose her, finally understood the truth. Belonging was not being needed badly enough that people could not let you leave. It was being free to go, and choosing, with your whole heart, to stay. Imagine standing where Abigail stood that spring morning. Your trunk is already loaded. The road ahead is open. Nobody owns your future. Nobody can demand your loyalty. And for once in your life, being useful is not the price of having a place at someone's table. Then you turn around. Not because you are afraid to leave, but because someone finally loved you enough to let you. That was what Graham had to learn too. Strength was never just in those enormous hands that could lift fence posts, carry injured children, or wrestle stubborn cattle through a Colorado winter. Sometimes strength meant loosening your grip. Sometimes love meant standing quietly while the person you wanted most walked toward a stagecoach, and trusting that if she returned, she would return freely. High Timber was still imperfect. Daniel was still gone. Helen still had difficult days. Owen still carried scars no splint could mend. But healing had found a place there because nobody was asked to replace what had been lost. They simply learned to make room for what came next. And maybe that is worth remembering. The people who truly belong beside us are not the ones we hold through obligation, pity, or fear. They are the ones who can leave and still choose the road home. If Abigail's choice stayed with you, tell me in the comments what you would have done at that stage stop. And if stories of wounded families, unexpected love, and second chances still have a place in your heart, subscribe and stay a while. There are many more stories waiting down the trail.